Welcome to Dabo Recap. Enjoy your viewing. Subscribe. In front of us was a young man with red hair. He started swearing and shouting all the bad words he knew. Being in shock, the guy did not understand what was happening and did not understand whether it all made sense. The guy looked at himself in the mirror and was stunned. The body he was in belonged to a fictional character who was a young master. Having made a serious look, the guy was thinking about something. He became even more serious than he was before. He screamed. It was not clear to him why he was in this particular body. This body belonged to one of the worst heroes of his story. It was the body of Hyuk Ryong-un, the weakest master and the villain of the martial arts novel. It was the young master of the demonic sect. He was in his spacious chambers and began to think about something. The young man was full of various thoughts. Our hero began to calm himself down and put his thoughts in order. It turns out his real name was Lee Si-woon. He was an ordinary citizen from Korea. He was already 32 years old. And then our hero looked at himself in the mirror again and continued to be surprised. Our hero did not understand how he could turn out to be the hero of his own work. He continued to reflect on this topic. He thought that something contributed to this event because there must be some kind of logic. He began to remember how, as a person in the real world and in his real body, he cleaned his house. It was a move. The guy was putting things in the new apartment in their places, and finally he finished. He reached for his drink on the table and began to take stock of the move. Sipping his drink, he stared at the screen of his smartphone. He was reading some news. Suddenly, the young man was very surprised. He saw something that shocked him. On one of the social networks, he saw a post that reported that a celebrity named Yo So-ra fell into a coma after a tragic accident. She was an actress. Suddenly, the things that were lying on the table next to him jumped up and fell to the floor. Our hero thought that lately everything was somehow not calm and strange things were happening, after which he leaned towards his fallen laptop. The guy saw something on the screen of his laptop. He was very surprised by what was there. But what was really there? Because of the sun that shone through our hero's window, the laptop screen was reflected, and therefore the desktop was difficult to see. A disk was opened on the desktop containing a folder called Hero Lee Si-yoon. A very expressive smile appeared on our hero's face, which stood out. The guy started leafing through this folder and remembering his past. This novel about martial arts was written 10 years ago. The guy didn't understand why he didn't delete it. Our hero sat down comfortably and began to read his unfinished novel about martial arts. Our hero was very surprised when he read his short story. Something came out on the screen and he did not understand what it meant. Suddenly, some kind of inscription appeared on the screen in front of our hero. Everything sparkled with blue light and our hero was moved somewhere. That's how he ended up in the body of one of the characters in his unfinished novel, and even with a mirror in his hands. It was the body of a young guy. He had red, thick hair. Our hero was trying to figure out if he could remember everything that happened before he got into this body. He felt unwell. He lowered the mirror and continued to sit on the bed in the chambers of the owner of this body. But still, he accepted this, and realized that he had now become Hyuk Ryong-un, as well as the fourth young master of the demonic sect. And then something very interesting flashed through the thoughts of our hero. The guy started thinking about new thoughts. He howled in pain, grabbed his head, and did not understand what was happening to him now. A picture of the memories of the owner of this body appeared before him, about how he had fun with some 2 girls, and how he didn't shy away from offending and beating homeless people if he wanted to, and also how he preferred drinking in the company of beautiful ladies to daily training. He took his head and realized that these were the very memories that the character of his short story had lived through. And then he remembered that the owner of this body is a minor character. But despite all this, the character of his wonderful short story came out with rottenness. But as if the essence of the situation was something else, the guy got up from the bed and began to think about something. One could notice how suddenly wild horror settled in our hero's eyes. He was very confused and started looking around as if something had happened. He remembered something terrible, and it turned out that our hero was able to realize something for himself. He was scared, after which he fell to his knees, grabbed his red head and began to scream something. It turns out that despite everything, the character was quite weak. The meaning of his existence was only to be a ladder for the main character. Hyuk Ryong-un, a negative hero, must die almost at the very beginning of the novel. Our hero was in a panic. He didn't know what to do. After all, I clearly didn't want to die. Our hero still continued to stand in the bedroom on his knees. On the floor, the young man understood that by some miracle he needed to return to the real world. And yet he finally began to realize that he was now the 4th master of the demonic sect. Despite the fact that the character is weak, he still has some kind of power in this world. This can be used as an advantage. And our hero also realized that it was time for him to gather his thoughts, and he screamed at the top of his voice. He shouted that in any case he would remain alive and return. Behind the door there were servants who, in panic, began to drop objects from their hands. They thought that their master had gone crazy. Our hero looked at himself in the mirror again, being in a new body, and noted that maybe everything was not so bad. Our hero still could not calm down one thing, namely that the character is very weak. The young man thought that he might have to use various techniques, such as Mugong. The body in which our hero was located could barely stand. The guy was almost falling. Suddenly, a strange feeling suddenly settled in him. He didn't really understand it. It was still a matter of the weakness of the body in which he found himself. The guy was not trained at all. And then he suddenly remembered a technique called Heavenly Wave Sword. The guy said that you can't just give up and you need to at least try. He began to clench his fists and seemed to begin to feel a surge of chi energy in his body. Suddenly our hero, who was in someone else's body, decided to take a stance to use the technique. And after that, he began to use the technique that he had recently remembered and waved his hand. After that, the guy screamed very loudly. He did not understand why he did this. Then he jumped, after which something really began to happen around him. He realized that something was really working out for him and was sincerely happy about it. But as it turned out, everything was not as successful as it might seem at first glance. Our hero screamed again, but this time it sounded like he was in hellish pain, and he found himself lying on the floor in an incomprehensible position, all twisted and unable to move. Then he screamed even louder, but this time with the goal of calling for help because he could not do anything. In response to cries for help, a young servant ran into the spacious chambers of Hyuk Ryong-un. The girl was in complete shock after she saw her master lying on the floor. Her master Hyuk Ryong-un was in a terrible state. Foam was coming out of his mouth, and he was lying crumpled on the floor, and his eyes were already turning blue around him. The girl was very scared. She screamed very loudly because she was shocked by what she saw. The sky was clear. It was still a hot sunny day outside. The sun illuminated everything around. In some room there was a bed, and next to the bed on a stand there was a samovar with steam coming out of it. There was a half-dead body of the gentleman on the bed, and needles were sticking out of his body. The guy did not understand what was happening. Some old man approached the bed on which the guy's body lay, and tried to put Hyuk Ryong-un on his feet. Finally, our hero woke up. He almost lost his life, although this was due to the fact that the young master's body was neglected. It was not ready for such tests. The gentleman made a grimace and wondered if the body in which he was located was really so unsuitable. He began to remember the essence of martial arts techniques, namely sword techniques. It belongs to the Hyuk Ryong family. Thanks to her, most of the leaders of the demonic cult grew up. To use it, you need a huge amount of chi energy. You also need to know the exact sequence of actions in order to apply it. But Hyuk Ryong-un himself neglected his training, so he did not even master such basic techniques. He never pumped up his chi. What can we say about the correct application of techniques? His body was incapable of anything. Our hero again began to wonder why he was placed in this weak body and what he did to deserve this. Having barely recovered, for some reason he decided to get out of bed. The guy sat for a couple of minutes, and then decided to leave. As it turned out, our hero was heading to some separate building with security at the entrance. He understood that his time was running out and something urgently needed to be done. He was determined. In this regard, for some reason, he decided to look into the library, which was located in that very separate building. After which he went to one of the bookshelves and touched a book. Apparently this was exactly what he needed, so he stood on his toes and took it out. This was not the only book needed. The guy picked up useful books and threw everything he needed to study onto the floor. Our hero took one of the books he needed. He opened it and began to look at the illustrations there, as well as read the text. The guy carefully read every line from this book, and then thought everything over carefully. The book was written in Chinese, so he would be able to extract the information he needed, since in his real life he could read Chinese characters. Therefore, he began to read about the demonic cult as soon as possible and expand his horizons on this topic. It turns out that its representatives do not call their sect by this name. They call themselves the Divine Cult of the Sun and Moon. This cult gained popularity during the Yuan dynasty, when they oppressed another people called the Han. The oppressed people settled in the Central Plains and fortified themselves there, after which they were able to free the prisoner of the Yuan dynasty. His name was Yuanzhang, and then he overthrew the previous government and created his own called Min. But still he had a fear of revenge, and therefore he was afraid of the divine power of the cult of the Sun and Moon, since he knew their power. Yuanzhang expelled the representatives of this cult immediately. He understood that they could come to him at any moment. They were forced to flee to another place, which was located far from the Central Plains. They barely survived. It was after this that the leader of the third-generation cult developed hatred for those people who drove away his representatives. He developed a plan to regain his power. However, he was constantly hindered by the Murima Alliance and Imperial soldiers, and therefore he was unable to accomplish his plan. The 15th cult leader, named Hyuk Ryong-moon, was forced to first occupy the western foreign region in order to then approach the Central Plains. And then our hero realized what the reason was for a duel to take place between this character and the main character of his novel. It turns out that the demonic festival is about to take place, and therefore Hyuk Ryong-moon will have to report on the tactics of attacking the Central Plains and introduce his successor. Now it was obvious who it would be. Our hero has already begun to regret that he came up with just such a plot for the novel. After the festival, the successor will be forced to advance with an army to capture the Central Plains. And after his failure in the succession competition, Hyuk Ryong-un decides to be part of the cavalry that will attack the Central Plains. But as soon as he meets the main character of the novel, he will immediately die from just one blow. There is not much time before this event occurs. 2 years. In general, this is the time that needs to be devoted to training so that, being in the body of this character, you do not die. It is for this reason that he needs to do something very urgently. The guy thought what was the best thing to do. And our hero, of course, came up with one very interesting idea. The guy got ready. Suddenly, Hyuk Ryong-un picked up a piece of parchment and began to lay it out on his desk. And then he picked up, first you need to compile a dossier of your opponent, namely the main character of the novel. At this time, the same old man who had put the gentleman on his feet was walking across the yard, and next to him was one of the servants. He couldn't believe that the young master had actually called him over to help him with his training. The young master's servant understood the old man's surprise, but still said that everything was so. The old man was even more surprised because it didn't look like their master. The girl added that, in addition to this, the guy began to speak in a language unknown to him, and then took up a pen and began to write. The old man's surprise knew no bounds. The young master had never put pen to paper before and was completely illiterate. The old man was even more shocked after hearing this. He watched the young master and widened his eyes. And he asked the servant to leave and then added that it would be better for her not to talk about the latest news. She agreed. The old man, of course, wanted to talk to the gentleman about his behavior, so he immediately rushed to him. But still, having reached the library, he stopped for a couple of seconds in front of its entrance and thought, "It is possible that the reason for this behavior of the gentleman is that he has not yet fully recovered. But suddenly, if he again rushes at the old man like a beast, then he does not know what to do." He entered the library and saw something unexpected for him. A young gentleman sitting on his knees, looking at some notes. Our hero, of course, immediately turned his attention to the old man who appeared. Then he examined him with his gaze and finally greeted him respectfully. There was simply no limit to the surprise on the old man's face. He was stunned. The young master began to look for something, but the old man continued to stand like a pillar and could not believe it. He immediately remembered how the young master threw all sorts of objects at him and insulted him. And then the young gentleman found what he was looking for, and with a chair in his hands, approached the old man. The old man was already scared. Our hero understood everything but was still surprised. After all, it is impossible to even imagine how ignorant the previous owner of this body was that the old man was so afraid of him. It was day outside. There were white clouds in the sky and the weather was clear. Our hero was sitting in the library and opposite him was an old man who was wondering what happened to the gentleman. And then our hero suddenly asked whether the old man was involved not only in the safety of the master, but also in his financial condition. The old man replied that both of these things were an integral part of his duties. The gentleman asked how much he could get by selling everything he had. The old man became worried and thought that the guy was in some kind of trouble. He suggested to his master that he allow him to personally solve this problem. The young master seemed to understand why he was behaving this way, but still stared at the old man. Our hero explained that despite all the strange things, everything was fine with their master. The old man continued to try to find out the essence of the problem, because he was very worried about his master. And our hero explained to him that money is a means to all kinds of opportunities. The old man became even more confused. The young master told him not to take too much into his head, and answered a simple question about the master's financial situation. The old man again asked about what he had asked earlier, and also added why he was interested in such things. Our hero tried to explain differently. He said that it was like he had risen from the dead and realized that his life was going downhill, so he wanted to change. In general, despite the fact that it was difficult for the old man to accept all this, he repeated his question to the old man, and he added that he should not waste time and start selling all the property right now, because they don't have time. At the same time, frightened and surprised, the old man finally agreed and was about to go carry out the order. The young master put his palms on the old man's hands to calm him down. The guy was in a good mood, and he said that he trusted him, and there was a lot of work ahead, so the old man could already begin to carry out this assignment. The old man was just about to leave, and our hero shouted after him that he should also start keeping records of sales and the amount of money earned. Walking away and looking around, the old man tried to understand what had just happened. And even if this is some kind of reincarnation, he still faces a completely different personality. The old man began to think that his master had gone crazy. Meanwhile, several days passed. There was a very bright sun shining in the sky. Gold coins of interesting shapes sparkled in front of our hero. It was the local currency. He had a bunch of these coins in his hands, but this is not all the things sold, and there is already so much money. But this may not be enough to develop a strategy. There are still 2 years ahead, and therefore we need to prepare thoroughly. He took some strange gray scroll into his hand. It contained important information for our hero. Our hero realized that he doesn't care about the character in his short story, and he does all this in order to survive himself. He walked around the room and thought about how much money he had at the moment. If we convert this into modern currency, it would be approximately 2 billion won. The festival will come in a couple of years, and after its end, everyone will know about the receiver. And after that, the main character will appear, who trained for many years in some cave. Accordingly, before these events occur, our hero and his body will be fine, and his life is not in danger for now. The guy continued to recall the plot of the novel. He remembered the moment when and how the main character of the story entered one of the caves in the forest. And inside the cave there was some kind of vial with liquid. The guy took it for himself, after which he took out his sword and apparently felt some kind of surge of strength. In the end, the protagonist of the martial arts novel became the strongest after this. Our hero realized that after receiving this drug, the main character of the novel will become the most powerful, and also added that this is banal. And then our hero pulled himself together and realized that it was time to start preparing while there was enough time. You need to visit the Heavenly Demonic Library to find out even more about this. Since this library is the property of the cult, a lot of information about martial arts can be obtained from it. This information is extremely necessary for our hero in order to survive. The guards who stood at the gates of this library kindly let the gentleman through. There were a lot of books in the library, but this seemed like a trifle to our hero since he was counting on a larger volume. This means it will take less time than he planned. He collected a lot of books and stacked them, holding them with his hands and leaning them on his chest. And suddenly our hero came across one very valuable and important book for him. It was a book about how to save your life through meditation. He immediately began to study her. It turns out that thanks to this technique you can strengthen your feelings. People who have learned this technique usually open their sixth sense and become stronger as a result. The technique can be used both to evade attacks and to catch your opponent by surprise, and also evaluate the capabilities of other fighters, and also see what others do not see, and thus avoid mortal danger. It turns out that this technique is very powerful. The guy realized that he needed to master the technique immediately. Our hero also remembered that the main character of the novel will not master this technique right away. Therefore, you can take advantage of the monopoly on it. This is a very good opportunity. But still, the danger cannot be avoided, because the main character will learn this technique one way or another. And then the young master's gaze fell on something else very, very important. The guy was surprised by the find. 2 more valuable finds were a book of scale armor and a book about the art of the 9 divine moons. Thanks to the scale armor technique, you cannot wear armor and parry blows with a sword. And the second technique could allow the wearer to increase his power by as much as 9 times. These are the basics that our hero will need in order to build tactics and save his life. He even joyfully shouted out loud that there was still a chance for life, and therefore he needed to start as soon as possible. Sometime later in the city, a group of people were sitting in one of the establishments. These were young guys with girls. They seemed to be celebrating something. There was a lot of food and drink on the table. One of them asked the other, whose name was Dan Pyong, if he was aware of recent events. He immediately understood what he meant, and replied that according to rumors from other people, Hyuk Ryong-un seemed to have resurrected from the dead. They took him for a local idiot. Another replied that the young master was really out of his head, but still something clicked in him and he changed. True, it is not clear in what direction the changes occurred. Dan Pyong said with a non-serious expression it was unlikely that Hyuk Ryong-un could change. The guy said that as soon as he found out about the return of their friend, he immediately went to see him. But when he arrived, they didn't let him in, saying that Hyuk Ryong-un was busy with something. Dan Pyong asked with a grin what urgent matters the gentleman had. After all he does is drink and make trouble. The interlocutor answered him that that was the point, and therefore he was going to check what had happened. And I learned that the young master spends all his time in the library. No one could believe that the young man could read. And then it was added that Hyuk Ryong-un was really going to cheat them and start his own gang. The interlocutor was no longer as cheerful as before. He was lost in his thoughts. What was he thinking about? Did Hyuk Ryong-un really want to take part in the competition at the Demonic Clan Festival? Dan Pyong was really very surprised when he heard all this and thought about it, to such an extent that he even choked on the drink he was drinking at that time. After that, the guy sarcastically said that as a joke it was quite good. He added in a joking manner that if our hero participates in the competition and wins, then he, Dan Pyong, will become a slave. Everyone who was in this establishment witnessed this. One of his company said that if something happens, it will be his own fault, because you need to think about what you say. From such words, Mokdan Pyong only laughed at his interlocutors in response and continued to rest. One of their company thought that there must be a reason why no one believes in Hyuk Ryong-un. Meanwhile, our hero continued to study books in the library necessary for survival. But at one point, suddenly, for some unknown reason, his ear began to itch. The guy scratched his ear. He thought that someone was mentioning him at the moment, since his ear itched so much. But the theory from books about martial arts was not as useful as practice in this matter. But the young master has no teacher to practice. Our hero still did not give up and continued to immerse himself in his thoughts, thinking about everything gradually. After that, he decided to do a warm-up. He got up from the floor and stretched well. And then for some reason he ran somewhere, because he remembered that he still knew one teacher. The guy didn't understand why he didn't realize this moment much earlier. It was obvious. Sunset was approaching in the sky, and an old man, whom our hero had entrusted with managing his fortune, was walking around the yard. He turned around because he heard some shouts in his direction from behind. It was the young master, and he was glad that he found this old man so quickly. A little later, our hero instructed his guards to find people from the list, and added that they should not hesitate. The old man looked at the list and asked in surprise why the fourth young master needed all this. The young master proudly replied that these people were his future teachers, who could teach him everything he needed. The old man was even more surprised and asked again. The gentleman insisted that these people be brought to him, and he also asked the old man to lead them to the training field as soon as they arrived. The old man did not understand all this, because he considered these people on the list to be scum, but he accidentally said it out loud and could no longer take his words back. Our hero's eyes were worth 5 cents. As soon as our hero found himself at the training site, he was not happy that the owner of this body, Hyuk Ryong-un, abandoned not only himself, but also the site, since he had never been there. He asked the old man how long it would take to bring the site into normal working condition. The old man said that it would take about a whole day and everything would be ready tomorrow. But still, something very strongly and suddenly alarmed our hero. He felt somehow strange. He began to sniff himself and realized that he had not taken a bath in a very long time, because he had been so engrossed in learning techniques from books in the library that he had forgotten about personal hygiene. It got dark outside. A bright yellow light could be seen from the house, illuminating everything around. Our hero was sitting in the bath and resting. The guy said that it was as if he had been reborn again. But it would seem what else could be surprising, when suddenly someone entered the room. Who was it? 2 beautiful girls appeared in front of him and began to undress. They offered to help him take a bath. Our hero, barely restraining his desires, politely replied that he did not need it. He said he could handle it himself. One of the girls was very surprised. She asked what happened to the young master. The young master waved his hand in their direction and once again asked them to leave, and then completely shouted at them. The girls did not understand at all what was happening to the young master, and were very surprised. And then our hero stood up from the water and shouted at them at the top of his voice to get out. Night fell. There was a large and bright moon in the sky, illuminating the dark clouds in the same sky. Our hero was sitting at the table and was not happy that he could not live in peace, knowing that his future was in danger. He looked at the pieces of paper attached to the wall. These were tasks and goals that were needed in order to survive. He understood that if he really wanted to get away with it, and even return to the real world, then he needed to plan everything clearly. And then his thoughts were interrupted by one of the servants. He came to the young master and said that Secretary Jian Murian was already there. Our hero was delighted and said to be brought in immediately. After some time, the secretary was already sitting in front of the young master, and did not understand why the hell this crazy gentleman from the divine cult had called him to him. He scratched his beard and thought about what perhaps the gentleman wanted to charge him with for something, and he began to guess. What could he have done that would make the young master scold him? He looked at the floor where the notes lay and was surprised. After all he had heard about the young master was that he was wasting his life. Then it is not clear why in his office there are only notes and books. Our hero bowed his head guiltily and apologized for this mess, and then served tea to the secretary. He stated that he specifically called him in person to discuss something, after which he apologized again, but this time for the fact that because of this meeting the secretary had to abandon all his work. The secretary was shocked. He felt very embarrassed to see the master apologizing to him, so he asked the young master to raise his head. Our hero raised his head, stared at the secretary, and said that he would follow the secretary's advice, since he wanted it so much. They both sat opposite each other with their eyes bulging. There was an awkward pause in their dialogue. Our hero assumed that the secretary was burning with curiosity about why he was now at a personal meeting with the young master, and he immediately answered that it was about martial arts. The secretary never ceased to be surprised, and he asked the gentleman about what he meant when he spoke about martial arts. Our hero placed a book on the table in front of him, on which was written, "Method of Long-Lasting Meditation, Introduction." And he added that this is not a simple book. It contains many unusual techniques that should not be underestimated and should be taken seriously, despite their simplicity. The secretary looked at the book and could not understand what the young master wanted from him. The gentleman explained to him that he was one of the authors of the operating instructions for the first martial arts, who knew everything from the divine cult. He was interested in the technique of long-term meditation. The guy said that despite the fact that he had already studied this book, he still understood little. The secretary still could not understand anything, and therefore was in a stupor. On the contrary, the young master had a very confident and insidious look. Our hero was confident in himself. He sat down on the table closer to the secretary and said that he wanted to be his student. It was unexpected. He was even more surprised. He did not understand what was happening and what exactly they wanted from him. The secretary began waving his hands in front of the gentleman and explaining that this was not possible. And the young master looked at him and asked the secretary if news had reached him about what he, Hyuk Ryong-un, was like before. The secretary confirmed this and said that indeed the young master was characterized as weak and the worst in the entire history of his cult, who takes advantage of the weakness of others and is a madman. And then he interrupted. His face showed that he clearly did not want to allow himself to say such a thing in front of the young master. And the young master surprisingly replied that he should not worry about it, and he added that he needs to gain strength. But he has little time, and therefore he needs to master all the techniques of his cult as quickly as possible. And he also said that he understands the importance of the basics. The secretary shed tears of happiness, and he firmly stated that he agreed with the young master. A sly look formed in our hero's eyes. He had carefully thought through this conversation before it took place, so everything went according to plan. He said he was aware of the rumors about him. It's as if he thinks the same way as a member of an orthodox sect. Therefore, no one from the cult will be able to support him. And he is embarrassed because he, as the fourth young master of the cult, himself contradicts the ideas of this cult. What he heard brought tears to his eyes even more than before. The old man was happy. It was as if he saw in front of him a repentant sweet boy who needed help. And then the secretary said that he created his own martial techniques, since the cult's techniques are not ideal. But still no one recognizes his brainchild. He was very happy that it was the fourth young master who was interested in him. Our hero said that he had not yet fully thought through everything he had said before. Suddenly, the secretary fell to his knees and bowed to him. It turns out that the secretary felt ashamed for not taking the young master seriously. Our hero put his hand on his shoulder to make him feel more comfortable and stood up. The guy tried to calm him down, saying that he was very important for their cult, so there was no need to worry so much. And he added that they have common interests. They both can refine the cult's martial arts. Therefore, we must not lose this opportunity. The secretary was ready to give even his life for such an idea. He thanked the gentleman for this opportunity. Our hero looked at him and realized that everything went more perfectly than planned. But still, he did not expect the secretary to be so frank. But the reason for choosing such a strange teacher is not only this, the guy thought about it. As the author of his novel, our hero remembered that Jiang Murian would become the greatest fighter in the future, who would be called a demonic tactician. Simply put, our hero simply needs such a powerful and strong mentor. The moon, which was in the sky, became even much brighter than before. The light from the moon illuminated everything around. Our hero made a list of his teachers, and the first was Jiang Murian. He marked it as valid. He stood smugly at the window in his hands with his notes, and was glad that he managed to lure such a powerful ally to his side. After all, the old man was one of the best geniuses of this novel, which our hero wrote. Once upon a time, the second young master also chose him as his ally. With the help of the old man, he was able to catch the main character of the story in a trap, and then he became a demonic tactician. Moreover, after the second young master became the heir of the demonic cult, he distinguished himself very much and took an important part in the war against the Murim alliance. And then our hero began to praise himself, thinking about how cool the script he had created. But still he realized that he was very distracted, and he began to think about the next stage of his big plan. But he immediately fell on the bed because of fatigue and realized that he really wanted to sleep. The guy fell asleep. Morning has come. The sky was as always clear and there were small clouds visible. Jiang Murian couldn't believe his eyes. He saw something interesting in front of him. There was a pile of papers on the table in front of him. The gentleman said that he was glad to be the old man's student, and the papers that were on the table were needed in order to study the theory. The secretary immediately began to look at one of the scrolls, and noted that despite the importance of the records, they only contained information about proper nutrition and such things. The gentleman replied that he had identified some shortcomings by studying the records of the cult's techniques. Therefore, he needs to get rid of these shortcomings as soon as possible. And then he asked again, demonstrating himself, "Is maintaining the form really not so important? After all, a person is what he eats." Yes, and maintaining tone is important. Jiang Murian was delighted. He said that martial arts are really based on the condition of our body. It turns out that he did not attach any importance to this in his entire life. The trick is that our hero compared all this with the real world, where athletes train and adhere to both a regimen and proper nutrition. The gentleman smiled and invited the secretary to begin his plan, namely, to improve his clan's techniques. Jiang Murian agreed with this. They were training. The gentleman did push-ups, and the secretary monitored the correctness of the exercise. When the young master was doing pull-ups on the horizontal bar, the secretary stood nearby and gave motivational speeches. It's the same with other exercises. Our hero even began to get a little mad from such motivation. Our hero trained Hyuk Ryong-un's body in real-world ways for just a couple of weeks, and yet there was already progress. Perhaps because our hero had good genes. Jiang Murian still stood nearby and motivated him with the fact that there was very little left. Our hero, continuing his training and running across the field, said that it was so. The secretary stood watching the gentleman and stubbornly wrote some notes in his diary. It turned out that he made changes to the training program to adjust it to the young master. The fact that Hyuk Ryong-un's body was getting better and better could not but please our hero. It was getting close to evening. In front of the building stood one of the guys from the same company in which they discussed Hyuk Ryong-un's changes, and then took turns with him and drank. He looked at the house and thought about what the young master did for a living. After all, before, as soon as he finished his business, he immediately went to the brothel to have a good rest. And then an old man appeared in front of him. The guy asked him where the young master was. He said that the master was busy with training. This guy couldn't believe what he heard. He was shocked and asked how this damn idiot could do something like that. The old man proudly replied that the gentleman had indeed been training for 2 weeks. The guy didn't understand what was happening. Before, Hyuk Ryong-un always dodged training, even when they were both in the heavenly pavilion, where they were doing just that. He shouted at the old man, saying that this is impossible. The reason for the guy's activities lies in keeping his body in shape in order to be more beautiful. The old man repeated the same thing he had said before and invited this guy to go with him to see for himself. He was simply in maximum shock. He didn't understand what was going on at the moment. At this time, on the site, the secretary stood opposite the young master and showed something. And he also noted without exaggeration that his master's fighting qualities were getting better every day. Our hero laughed at what he heard and asked if it was really what he said. The silhouette of a guy appeared behind the gentleman. He asked a question about what was going on here. Our hero turned around and addressed the guy by name. The guy's name was Sang-won-hu. The gentleman asked this guy why he had come. From the memories of Hyuk Ryong-un, our hero already knew that this guy was a member of the 4 divine gangs. Cooperation with these gangs is pointless and ineffective. Sang-won-hu asked the young master in surprise why he had not spent time with them for a long time, because they had communicated together before. He replied that he was busy training. The guy was a little scared. He asked what all this meant because before the rebirth, Hyuk Ryong-un was a completely different person. Our hero wondered if it was unlikely that Hyuk Ryong-un was respected in these circles, since everyone considers him so untenable. Sang-won-hu continued to express his concern for the young master, and accordingly for his comrade. He also noted that even the young master's gaze had changed since the last time he was seen in the company. He even put forward a crazy theory that someone had possessed Hyuk Ryong-un's body. Our hero thought to himself that this guy might not be so stupid after all. Still, he waved his hand towards the guy and said that he could fail if he continued to talk this nonsense, since time is a valuable resource. Our hero replied that he would now tell everything as it is. He explained that after he returned to life, he began to think about his past and the meaning of life in general. And then the secretary bent a little, his back hurt, and our hero himself began to give a motivational speech about how there is no need to stop. And then he even thought that perhaps he, after all, had gone too far with his speech. Sang-won-hu rudely replied that training was not important, and our hero thought that this guy was a good candidate for the first opponent to test his strength. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he rushed at this poor guy to hit him. Hyuk Ryong-un jumped over his body and was ready to deliver his powerful punch. Sang-won-hu's eyes were simply terrified. The guy even started screaming at the top of his voice in fear. The young master screamed as if he was doing this blow for the last time in his life. And Sang-won-hu suddenly flew away from such a powerful blow from our hero. The blow was very powerful. Probably even our hero did not expect this from himself. But still on some kind of doubt or disappointment in what he saw arose on his face. His opponent flew to the side, but was able to unexpectedly for him to stand on his own 2 feet. Despite this, Sang-won-hu shouted that this still needed to be stopped. But our hero did not stop there. He decided to take another tee shot to check something. He was just glad to see how much power and strength he had after hard training. And in the face of Sang-won-hu, there was still the same horror of what was happening in front of him. He became enraged and tried to strike back at the fourth young master. But our master parried this blow with his right hand without any effort. He even began to mock the guy, asking him how he feels. And Sangwon-hu continued to try to strike back. Our hero asked how long it had been since that guy had fought against strong opponents like the young master. And then, unexpectedly, he invited Sangwon-hu to study with him. The guy asked the young master in surprise whether he was confident in his proposal. Our hero offered him cooperation, which consisted of joint training for a month. After all, he still doesn't lose anything. He turned away and said in a touchy voice that the young master had really gone crazy. Our hero repeated again that the duration of joint training would last only 1 month. And then he realized how he could lure this guy, based on the memories of his new body. He said that he could give him his blue horse, which he really wanted. The guy turned around with a malicious smile and asked again whether he understood the essence of the proposal correctly. Our hero stood with a confident look and confirmed what was said once again. He also remembered that Sangwon-hu was pestering Hyuk-ryong-un, so he could take revenge on him. A day later, the sky as before was clear and white clouds were visible on it. Someone was running without stopping around the training area in the yard in the heat. It was Sangwon-hu. It was clear from his appearance that he was very exhausted. He was covered in sweat and full of hatred towards Hyuk-ryong-won for making him train so hard. And our hero ran with him and was already ahead, adding that he should move. Sangwon-hu's anger knew no bounds. He said that he had never had such hard training in his life. Jung Muryeon stood nearby and answered the guy that he needed to improve his physical condition, which in turn would affect his internal energy. The tired guy asked what kind of nonsense he had just heard. The young man was at a loss. Our hero, still running ahead, said that this was just the beginning of the whole journey. Sangwon-hu was simply in the wildest shock. He was completely horrified by what he heard. He thought about the fact that they were both from high-ranking families. They tried to instill in them a predisposition to martial arts from childhood. They were forced to take various drugs. However, there was nothing for physical activity. But still, if Hyuk-ryong-un can really improve his physical condition, then combined with everything else, he will give great power. The secretary still stood nearby on the training ground and whistled with his whistle. And Sangwon-hu simply died from such an intense and unusual training for him. Our hero asked him if he liked the activity, and he hesitated a little. The secretary continued to blow his damned and hated Sangwon-hu whistle. Then he pointed to Sangwon-hu and said that he needed to run 5 more laps. The guy was clearly not happy. And the young master waved his hand after him and told him to put a little more effort into the training, thinking that the blue horse will soon belong only to him. Sangwon-hu continued to run. Just a month and the horse will belong to him. Jung Muryeon showed his notes to Hyuk-ryong-won. Our hero noted that it turned out even better than he expected. He also asked if the technique could be applied to ordinary fighters. Sangwon-hu meanwhile stopped and tried to catch his breath. A smile appeared on Hyuk-ryong-un's face, and he answered the secretary that they could try, because they already had one experimental subject. A month later, Sangwon-hu was already lying crumpled on the floor and completely exhausted, and our hero and Jung Muryeon stood nearby. The young master asked what was on the calendar. Everything went according to plan, and new people will join their training soon. They continued to look at the poor guy who was lying on the floor in an incomprehensible position. Sweat poured from him and, barely uttering words, he said that a month had already passed and his blue horse was his. The young master interrupted him and noted that he really deserved what he worked so hard to achieve. Since our hero keeps his word, he gave the horse to the young man. The guy angrily shouted Hyuk-ryong-un's name. Our hero was even a little surprised by this. Sangwon-hu asked him if the master was obsessed with someone else, although there were differences between the previous and current master, but our hero thought that the guy was saying the truth. But he wouldn't be able to tell him everything so simply, and the guy wouldn't believe it. The guy asked the young master about his intention to become the winner at the festival. He replied that everything was correct. He said that he changed in order to win the competition. Sangwon-hu was horrified again and asked again at this point. Our hero answered affirmatively that he was the very first contender for the inheritance. The guy, in horror, put his hands on the young master's shoulders and warned him to be more careful with his words. After all, if the master's brother finds out about this, then they will do everything in their power just to make the young master disappear. Sangwon-hu got worried and asked the gentleman to change his mind because it's not worth it, and you can just have fun and walk like before. Our hero was surprised. He didn't believe that the guy really cared about Hyuk-ryong-won. He's also a minor character, and for some reason he spoke so convincingly. But still, our hero replied that he really wanted to participate in the competition at the festival. He continued to stand his ground and convince the young master of his decision. And the young master replied that he had really gone crazy, and therefore offered cooperation to this guy. He was even more surprised. After all, it sounded so wild, everyone around was a little surprised. Our hero explained that he wants to interrupt the tradition of the divine cult, according to which all hopes rest on the eldest son, so the younger sons rest. The guy replied that in principle he was right and everything really was like that. And our hero continued to explain. He added that he just wants to break this damn pattern, although it is not easy. That is why they need to win the competition. And then he said that he needed a colleague who would worry about him more than about himself. Therefore, he invites him to be partners, because he trusts him. He stood stunned. He did not believe that this was all happening in reality. He, not knowing what to do, grabbed the young master with his hands and called him a sick idiot. Suddenly he burst into tears. He said that the proposal was great, and they need to stand together against these stereotypical things invented by the cult. Our hero was shocked. Sang-won-hu fought for the young master and began to sob on his chest. Our hero couldn't understand why it was so easy for him to get others emotional. He hugged Sang-won-hu and thanked him for his sincerity and added that he was pleased that he had such a comrade. Sang-won-hu thanked him in return, and then he asked the gentleman what they should do. After all, despite the fact that the problem is relevant, there is no solution yet. The young master replied that he had some ideas about this and began to think about it. Sang-won-hu replied that he would help him in any case, no matter what was required of him. Our hero never ceased to be amazed at this guy's devotion. It was good. Night has come. There was a bright moon in the sky and gray clouds were still visible as before. Our hero stood in front of chests filled to the brim with gold coins. Sang-won-hu rendered our hero a very useful service. Thanks to his contacts, he was able to sell those things that the young master could not get rid of. Where did the fourth young master come from so much inheritance? Where did he get it all? It was a mystery. In general, one problem has been solved, so you can proceed to the next stage. Morning has come. As always, clear skies with small white clouds. Our hero trained on the site with that same guy named Sang-won-hu. He tried to strike him in order to demonstrate his strength. Sang-won-hu, as always, he fought back and did it very well. Suddenly, the guy stood on one leg and began to make some movements. Sang-won-hu jumped up to throw a kick. Our hero was surprised at his abilities. He was delighted with this fight, because even he did not expect such a turn to happen. And Sang-won-hu began to tease the fourth young master to answer him. And then our hero began to approach his opponent in order to take him by surprise, and he dealt him a rather powerful blow. As it turned out, he hit, and the blow was successful. The guy hit Sang-won-hu right in the face, and he in turn expected this. He fell and started whining about how he couldn't beat Hyuk-ryong-won and asked for time to rest. The satisfied fourth young master agreed with this, because there is still progress from this. And to the surprise of Sang-won-hu, our hero began to practice strikes with himself. Sang-won-hu was stunned. He said that if he showed his skills in the Divine Demonic Pavilion, he would immediately be noticed. Our hero replied that at that time he was not at all interested in this status and did not want to study. Sang-won-hu continued to recall his childhood, and said that they used to have high hopes for the young master, and thought that he would become a martial arts genius. Our hero did not know how to respond to this in such a situation, and so he simply remained silent. And in order to understand the essence of what he heard, he began to rummage through the memory of Hyuk-ryong-un. He remembered how, as a child, he was training, and someone stood behind him and watched. She was a very beautiful and young woman. Her face was illuminated by the bright sun. At this time, little Hyuk-ryong-un punched someone in the face and won. His then opponent found himself lying on the ground and immediately gave up because he did not want to continue. Hyuk-ryong-un turned and saw that another man was standing next to that beautiful woman. This man praised the boy. Apparently it was his father, and the woman was also delighted with the young man's skills. This was very flattering to little Hyuk-ryong-un because it's nice to be praised. But one terrible rainy day, something terrible happened. What could have happened? Some were buried with honors. There were a lot of people in the square, including little Hyuk-ryong-un. It was the same woman. She is the mother of young Hyuk-ryong-un. The guy was very sad. He couldn't hold back his tears. It was from that moment that Hyuk-ryong-un went into himself and no longer wanted to practice martial arts. It was since then that this character changed and turned into boorish and offending others who are weaker than himself. And he communicated precisely with those same members of the Gang of Four Heavens. Moreover, he was popular in the company of girls. But after our hero ended up in his body, he turned this character's hopelessness into a desire to survive by any means necessary. But our hero still wanted not only to survive, but also to return to the real world. Sang-won-hu interrupted the memories and thoughts of our hero and asked him what he was muttering about himself. He took the towel in his hands and told Sang-won-hu not to pay attention to it. He threw a towel around his neck and added that he wanted to entrust his friend with something else. Sang-won-hu asked what exactly he would need to do. The fourth young master asked his friend to introduce him to someone. The gentleman suddenly whispered something in his ear. Keeping the intrigue, the guy was surprised. And then he immediately shouted and said that Hyuk-ryong-un was simply crazy with such ideas. Our hero said with a confident face that everything was so and he was really crazy. Sang-won-hu's surprise knew no bounds. He couldn't believe what he heard. It was about the Divine Wolf Group. This was one of the strongest groups of people in the divine cult of the sun and moon. Their best archer was called Sabu Seong. Apparently, Sangwon-hu knew him very closely. Night has come. A young man stood in front of the illuminated room. Sabusin had already accepted the invitation at this time, and was glad that Sangwon-hu approached him, because they had not seen each other for many years. The only strange thing is that he invited him to some strange hotel. Perhaps he guesses something. And then the doors of the room finally opened in front of his face. There was someone Sabu Seong was happy to see. Standing outside the door was Sangwon-hu, who began to kindly greet the guest. He was so happy about this meeting that he hugged Sabu Seong very tightly. Sabu Seong already thought without a doubt that perhaps he knew something, although this was not the person who was chasing power and wealth. Finally, Sabu Seong answered him and was no less happy about this meeting. He also asked him in surprise how he managed to maintain such a wonderful shape, because someone did not like to train a lot. He embarrassedly agreed with what was said, because he did not want to contradict our guest. And then, from behind Sabu Seong, he suddenly heard his name spoken by someone's voice. Behind him stood the fourth young master, who said that he was glad to see him. Sabu Seong stood in a stupor. He clearly did not expect such a turn of events. The guy stood in shock. Sangwon-hu held his head in a panic and said that this was bound to happen sooner or later. Hyuk Ryong-un unexpectedly began to bow to Sabu Seong's feet for everyone. Everyone was shocked, but he saw that for some reason he became very angry, which was not entirely explainable to him at that moment. He immediately sensed something was wrong. The guy thought that his life would really end earlier than it was in his short story. It turns out that as a child, the young master offended Sabu Seong when they studied together. In addition to this, he also insulted him, humiliated him, and simply did not give him a chance to lead a normal life. And he also considered him a weakling, who was not capable of anything in this life, and would achieve nothing. He, along with other students, mocked him in public, humiliating the poor guy. And Sabu Seong definitely did not forget about his old grievances, he kept them to himself. The young master also teased him with money, calling him a beggar and bragging to him. And Sabu Seong was very angry about this, because who could possibly like something like that? The gentleman called him a beggar and teased him that he would not be able to hit him, and he humiliated him by offering to take the money so that he would not be offended, although this was in fact an insult. The crowd laughed at young Sabu Seong without feeling the slightest pity for him, but he still took the money. Apparently he was really very poor, since they were useful to him. But his anger did not recede anyway. He did not stop accumulating it, and in the end he was very angry. But despite all the bad things that happened to him, he had the support of his loved ones. One of them was Sangwon-hu, who was his friend. And then Sabu Seong swore that in the future he would take revenge on Hyuk Ryong-un, and he would answer for all the insults. He wanted to become a member of a powerful group in order to be able to challenge anyone he wanted to a duel. This is how he could take revenge on the offender. He sincerely wanted to take Hyuk Ryong-un's life. Sangwon-hu was surprised at such strange and serious desires on the part of his friend. In general, when Sabu Seong saw our hero in the body of the young master, he immediately clenched his fist tightly. And he told his friend Sangwon-hu that apparently his thirst for revenge would finally calm down. Or maybe Sangwon-hu is pursuing some other goals in this regard. Sabu Seong didn't really understand. Sabu Seong's friend began to calm him down because he was very angry and could not control himself. But despite his friend's support, his eyes filled with rage and he could no longer control himself. And he ran into the young master unexpectedly for everyone in the room. But then I saw that the young master was on his knees and kindly greeted our guest. He looked at him in surprise and still couldn't understand what the hell was going on here. He was embarrassed by what was happening here, and how the young master reacted to him. Sangwon-hu shouted something from behind the guest. Apparently he still wanted to calm him down. And then Sabu Seong laughed, adding that the situation was gaining new interest. Finally, our hero turned to the guest, and he said that to kneel before anyone from the sect means to admit defeat. Sabu Seong said that he doesn't care about Hyuk Ryong-un's defeat, and asked why the hell he called him here. The young master replied that he understood everything perfectly, but still wanted to talk to Sabu Seong. He stood in bewilderment because it was very strange, and yet he agreed, but only if the young master endures something. Apparently there was some kind of catch in this. Sangwon-hu considered Sabu Seong to be a psycho, because as a young master he could defeat the best fighter of the serious group. Our hero looked at the guest and was already ready for anything, because it was necessary for him to listen to him. And unexpectedly he bowed to him, and even decided to thank him for this opportunity. A powerful blow from the guest immediately flew towards our hero. The guy was completely shocked by the power, and he was even able to avoid this, which was very surprising to him. Then he realized that the blow was quite powerful and also fast, and the guest continued to deliver his blows, as if in front of him was not a person but a pair, and he was very angry that he could not hit Hyuk Ryong-un, because he spent a lot of his strength on these blows. But still the guest did not retreat. He continued to do the same thing. Blow after blow he tried to hit. Hyuk Ryong-un was again able to dodge the blows, and then he hit the floor with his fist. It was not easy for our hero to dodge such fatal blows. Sabu Seong grabbed the young master by the shirt and pulled him towards him. The guy could not escape. Fear was expressed in the eyes of the young master. He was still trying to win over the evil guest. Sabu Seong was pleased that at least he was able to grab him and now he won't go anywhere. And then he pressed the young master into the floor with his hand. He was turned over by the enormous power of Sabu Seong. The gentleman almost lost consciousness, but one of his eyes remained open. And then the guest decided to deliver the final decisive blow to end this show, and hit him right in the face. His face was so angry that it turned red. Sang Won-hu screamed in horror, fearing for the life of the fourth young master. And Sabu Seong's face finally showed calmness, because he had poured out his anger for many years of grievances. But he didn't take something into account. He was too confident at that moment. The young master managed to block this blow with both hands and was completely fine. Sabu Seong couldn't believe what he saw. After all, his offender did not study martial arts. Our hero, with a smile on his face, said that enough was enough, and now it was Sabu Seong's turn to fulfill his part of the agreement. He was unhappy. He turned around and told the young master not to hesitate. Sang Won-hu said that since the show is over, we can get to the point. He was glad that the young master was able to block that fatal blow. Our hero was delighted with himself. It turns out that his training was not in vain. The moon in the sky was already shining with a bright orange light. It was late at night. The moon illuminated everything around. Finally, all three calmed down and finally gathered. They sat down at the table. Our hero turned to the guest. He was already full of calm and could adequately perceive what was being said to him. The young master suddenly said that he would need Sabu Seong's help in the future. The three of them continued to sit at the table and communicate peacefully without any fights. Sabu Seong said that he was not clear about the essence of this conversation and why he called him. Our hero explained that everyone from Sabu Seong's group uses swords and spears in battle, but Sabu Seong will stand out among them. He asked displeasedly what kind of hints. Are they really reproaching him for being a coward, since he is the only one in the group who uses a bow? The young master replied that this is so he wants the guest to teach him what he can and knows. Sabu Seong was dumbfounded. He was in complete shock. He did not believe what he just heard. He got angry and again wanted to rush at his offender, and Sang Won-hu tried to restrain him again. The guest pointed his finger at Hyuk Ryong-un and said that he never watches his language and talks nonsense. Our hero tried to justify himself. He said that he did not mean any insults by this and just wants to learn the same thing that Sabu Seong can do. Usually they try to achieve goals using the most convenient method. Melee weapons are good weapons, so warriors don't exactly respect those who wield a bow. Our hero explained to the disgruntled guest that he sees the great superiority of those people who wield a bow, so being able to use a bow is a very useful skill. Sabu Seong and Sang Won-hu were very surprised by his words. After all, it was very unexpected. And finally, the angry guest calmed down and pulled himself together so as not to start another fight. He tried to clarify this point in order to clarify all the causes and consequences. And our hero again called him by name and added that he sees a purpose in Sabu Seong's skills. So we need to use this so that this does not go to waste. Finally, the guest agreed. Our hero still managed to push him through. The young master initiated him into his plans. He said that he wanted to create the most powerful squad of archers that would be better than Sabu Seong's group, and the guest should be in charge there. The guest's surprise knew no bounds. He didn't understand whether it was a dream or reality. And then he revealed that Hyuk Ryong-un still despises him, because due to past grievances he could not believe that the young master had changed for the better. And then the gentleman threw off the large golden blanket from the table under which something lay. Under that cover there were 3 large chests in the form of closed safes. The guest was surprised and asked what was in them. Probably something very important. Our hero opened the chest to satisfy the curiosity of his guests, and what was there shocked others, and it turned out to be a bunch of gold coins. Our hero decided that he could bribe the guest with money. Sabu Seong suddenly grabbed the 4th young master and was again very angry about something. He asked how long he would continue to make fun of him. He still couldn't believe that there was no catch in all of this. Our hero again tried to explain himself. He said he doesn't care about jokes at the moment. After all, he is really looking for a way to lure the guest to himself so that he will fight for him. And he added that among all the famous archers, he had not seen anyone better than Sabu Seong. That is why our hero, despite the past, decided to schedule this meeting. And then the young master spoke about his intentions. After all, he really wants to win the competition at the festival and become the successor of the demonic clan. Sabu Seong let go of the master and was stunned. Just as before, he tried to accept this, but it was hard for him. He still couldn't believe what was happening. It simply defied his logic. Still, he said it was a stupid idea, because it sounds unconvincing. Because the young master clearly never made friends with his own head and did not think about such things. Our hero confirmed his words and added that since they know him as a madman, they need to prepare extremely carefully. Sang Won-hu decided to add something of his own. He said that the young master was not just a madman, Our hero was surprised. And then he added that Hyuk Ryong-un was completely beaten, and the two of them started laughing. And the guest stood opposite them and could not believe what he saw. He took a closer look at the young master and realized that he had really changed. You can even see it in his eyes. He has a cheerful face. He even smiles, and at the same time confidence is visible in his gaze. In general, Sabu Seong seemed to calm down and again tried to be adequate so as not to do anything. And those two saw it and looked at him. They just watched him and were in a little shock. Our hero asked the guest again about what he thought about the plan. Sabu Seong pretended to be modest and said that he agreed, but obviously not because of the money. He explained that people usually change after being reborn, and he really wants to help the young master in this case. The young master raised the vessel with the drink and said that they should all drink to this. And he began to pour a drink for the guest so that he would loosen his tongue and start talking even more. The night did not end, and dark clouds formed in the sky, flying in front of the moon. No longer quite sober, the guest did not give up trying to find out from the young master what had happened to him. After all, his current behavior is impossible to believe. Our hero replied that he understood perfectly why, and even expressed regret for past grievances and for everything he had caused. But he explained this only by the immaturity of that time. The guest noted that he still did not completely trust the young master. Our hero understood this. Hyuk Ryong-woong asked how he could earn Sabu Seong's trust and support. Sabu Seong said that he wanted to personally teach the young master how to use a bow so that he could shoot well. Our hero was very surprised. He couldn't believe that Sabu Seong would say exactly that. And then the guest's rage awoke again. He thought that he had caught Hyuk Ryong-un, and it was still right that he did not trust him. He remembered again about one of the past grievances, about his long-ago training where he was again bullied. Sabu Seong stood on the field and shot with a bow, trying to hit the target he practiced seriously. Young Hyuk Ryong-woong watched and made fun of him. He began to hint that he had not seen a single courageous archer. And behind the young master stood the guys from his company and also laughed. But the young master did not stop there. He said that there are rumors that Sabu Seong is impotent, but Sabu Seong still continued to train and tried to hit the target. He thought about how he trained as a boy, how he shot arrows that flew quite quickly, and he hit the target exactly because from childhood he was a good archer. And his father was nearby and supported him, because his son was really good at archery. Sabu Seong was delighted with his archery and couldn't be happier, and his father was also proud of him. He liked the way he raised him, and the guy was grateful to his parents. His father was also a cult archer, therefore he taught his son everything he knew and could. But fucking Hyuk Ryong-woong always despised Sabu Seong and mocked him for his bow skills. Although now it seems like completely different times have come for him, the guy has changed a lot. He looked at Sabu Seong with a kind look, and without any mockery, there was only kindness on his face. The satisfied master got up from the table and leaned towards the guest. He asked if this was all that was required of him at the initial stage. It turns out that our hero, after all, wanted to learn how to shoot a bow. And then he politely asked the guest to teach him this art. Sabu Seong couldn't believe it even more. And our hero began to repeat that there was no malicious intent in this, and he really wanted to be able to shoot a bow. But it was difficult for the guest to accept this as the truth, considering how the young master had treated him in the past. And yet he mustered up determination and faith in justice, and then raised the vessel with the drink. And he demonstrated how he eagerly drinks alcohol from this vessel. Our hero was glad that he managed to reach the guest and come to an agreement with him. Drunk Sabu Seong said that everything is valid, and he will teach the young master what he knows. Sabu Seong held out a jug of drink right in front of our hero and wanted to surprise him. With great confidence on his face, he told him that he would now drink to the bottom. Our hero accepted this challenge with an equally serious face. Although in his head the guy was surprised, and he did not deceive his guest. Standing on his feet, he actually drank it all to the dregs. Sang-won-hu looked at what was happening in front of him and couldn't believe his eyes. And he noted that the meeting did take place and was not bad at all. The guy was happy. The two drunken bodies looked at Sang-won-hu and said that it was his turn now. The young master handed him a jug. Sang-won-hu said that he was not resistant to alcohol, but no one listened to him. They started pouring alcohol into his mouth by force. He was furious, and someone from the company said that they needed to drink until they were blue in the face. Finally, morning came. As clear as ever, the rays of the sun illuminated everything around as they passed through the clouds. The guest slept on the bed, and Sang-won-hu was laid on the floor. They slept half-dressed. And then Sabu Seong, barely raising his head above the bed, opened one eye. He saw his comrade sleeping on the floor in front of him. The guy was a little surprised. After that, he grabbed his head. After a good drinking session, his head hurt very badly. And then he began to remember the interesting events of the previous night, during which they drank a lot. The way he expressed to the young master everything that had accumulated over many years. At that very moment, Sang-won-hu became an alcoholic and could not stop. Sabu Seong had tears in his eyes when he talked about what he had to endure in his youth because of Hyuk Ryong-woon. and our hero still continued to apologize for past misdeeds. He also again tried to extract from the young master why he nevertheless decided to create a detachment of archers. This was not entirely normal, especially for him, even though he was crazy. Rubbing his head, the awakened guest realized that despite the strangeness and degeneration of the young master, he was, and remains, the fourth young master of the divine cult. Really, though, if this was a prank or a setup, the young master would have given himself away while he was very drunk. But even drunk, he kept repeating the same thing. He was sincere. And then the door to the bedroom opened. Perhaps someone decided to check on them. Someone entered the room. It was the servant who came in and said that the guests' food and clothes were already ready. Sabu Seong expressed his gratitude and asked to be taken to Hyuk Ryong-woon. The servant replied that he was already studying on the site, namely, learns to shoot a bow. Sabu Seong couldn't believe his ears, and he asked how this was even possible. The servant invited Sabayo Seong to see for himself and told him to follow her. The target on the court was a wooden board with a red rectangle in the center. It was clear from the arrows that the young master did not know how to shoot a bow at all. In principle, the guy himself understood this because it was very obvious. And then Sabu Seong came out to him, who I couldn't believe what I saw in the servant's stories. Our hero politely greeted him and asked how he was feeling after such a stormy night. The guest replied that everything was fine. The young master said that he decided to start training on his own, but so far he had not achieved any success. The fourth young master asked for some advice on archery. Sabu Seong stood in complete shock. He didn't understand what a strange question it was. Our hero continued asking his questions. First, he asked about the correct stance. Sabu Seong said that everything is fine and this stance is used by hunters. Therefore, it still takes place. Our hero called the guest a devilish archer and noted that he learned this stance during the Great Hunt. He asked what kind of nickname the fourth young master had just said. The young master replied that the guest should not take this into his head and asked to show him a masterclass on archery. Sabu Seong still believed Hyuk Ryong-un and finally took the bow in his hands and prepared to show. He pulled the bowstring and took aim very carefully. He had a focused and confident look. Watching this, our hero noticed that it all looked impressive. And then Sabu Seong finally decided to let go of the bowstring and shoot from the bow. The arrow fired from his bow flew at an incredibly high speed. And in the end, she fell right into the center of that red rectangle. It was very spectacular. Cracks even formed around the arrow on the wooden target, so tightly did Sabu Seong pull the bowstring. Our hero was blinded by such skill in archery and such an impressive result. He even started clapping and praising the guest, as if this was some kind of show in which a master demonstrates his abilities. Sabu Seong immediately noted that the hunting stance and the attacking stance work completely differently. If the young master trains hard, he will be able to hit the target just as effectively. Our hero suggested with impatience that we start as soon as possible. The guest replied that during the day he would have a general training session with his group, so they could start the lesson after. The young master tried to hold him back, saying that training with the group was not necessary, so he could start the lesson right now. And Sabu Seong asked why he thinks so. Our hero took out some kind of scroll and reminded the guest about yesterday's deal. The document said that Sabu Seong undertakes to leave his group and join a new one. In fact, everyone was drunk during this agreement, and Sabu Seong was not fully aware of what was happening at that moment. But still, he remembered this moment. He was clearly ashamed and embarrassed that he was signing contracts in such an environment. The young master handed Sabu Seong this document and said that this was his contract. The guest could not believe it. Everything was so good that it all looked like a dream. He asked the young master whether he regretted the amount of money he would be forced to pay, and the amount of the down payment already made. And the money that the young master will be forced to pay him under the contract exceeds his previous income by 10 times. Despite this, his previous group was quite famous. Our hero looked at Sabu Seong with a confident and very decisive look. He said that the amount of future income is obvious, because Sabu Seong is a talented archer and a master of his craft. And he added that the contract, in addition to this, also stipulates some bonuses in addition. Moreover, our hero has already delivered boxes of gold to Sabu Seong directly to his home, because they weigh so much that he himself would not be able to carry them. Sabu Seong didn't know what to say to him, and the young master added that he had high hopes for him. And then he said that this is all for the sake of the bright future of the divine cult. The guest stood and still could not understand what had happened. He simply couldn't believe what was happening. Our hero understood that he had succeeded in this part of the plan. He was proud of himself, and also rejoiced at the good news. After all, he recruited a powerful devil archer as an ally. He is the best in this field, according to the novel. He could even replace the greatest demonic tactician who was second young master's assistant. But the point is that Sabu Seong does not yet know his greatness, since he made a name for himself after the death of Hyuk Ryong-woon. According to the script, they were not supposed to meet. But still, our hero was surprised by the difficulties that Sabu Seong experienced in childhood, because in his novel he did not describe these moments. Everything happened on its own. In general, according to the plot of the novel, the second young master trained a lot and created a powerful squad of archers, who were called the Demonic Archer Unit. This tactic worked well against Murim, but our hero still doesn't have much time to waste. Therefore, perhaps his squad will not surpass the power of the squad that the second young master created. But then he remembered something else. Something very, very important to him. The guy thought about it. He needs another unit besides the archers. The unit that will be the most powerful and strong. We are transported back to the temple. Our hero was sitting over a cup of coffee and thought. So much milk was added to the coffee that it seemed like there was no coffee at all. Our hero loved the option, which was unusual for these places. Sweeter. He sat in front of his workbook and thought. He had to figure out how to form a special unit. He turned to the side. Two partners in his mysterious case were heading towards him. Having said good morning, the partners began to discuss the matter. Sabu-sen looked more reserved. There was a scroll in his hands. He handed it to our hero and explained that it contained a list of the names of the most talented archers he knew. Our hero turned to Sangwon with a question about how the formation of special forces is progressing. Unfortunately for the team, there were certain problems with this. To form a group, a leader is needed, and there would be no problems if it was necessary to find a person under personal subordination, but he would formally serve the cult. Our hero had to solve one of the most unpleasant problems. Bureaucratic. Well, he had ideas on how to do it. Sangwon proposed a completely different approach. Since you need to form a lineup from scratch and quickly, you just need to find an already formed group and recruit them for yourself. Overall, it wasn't a bad idea, with its pros and cons but relatively working. The hero asked if he already had some kind of group in mind. Sangwon replied that our hero also exists and knows them himself. Trying to remember at least someone who would be suitable for this role, our hero was rather simply wasting his time. Sangwon was surprised how he could forget what kind of group it was, because he was one of its founders. He was talking about the Four Heavens Gang. Our hero was surprised that these scum were even registered as an official group. Our hero was reminded of events that he seemed to have to remember, but this was still difficult for him. Perhaps the most important thing was that it was not he, but Dan Penn, who became the manager of that gang. Again, a discussion of bureaucratic issues. According to another hero, he's only registered as the head, but in reality the people he hired are in charge there. The hero was a little sad. Problems appeared one after another. Although on the other hand, his situation has only improved so far. Well, it's time to hit the road. It was with these words that our hero headed out of the house, leaving his surprised friend behind. Already at the door, he was caught with the question, where is he going? A pathetic turn and a pathetic phrase were expected. It was impossible to let down. He turned and replied that he would go to a meeting with the head of the clan, of course. Where else? The pathetic reversal was 100% success. Our hero's friend did not understand what was happening. Will he really ask to hand over the clan to him? They tried to convince our hero that he did not understand who he was dealing with and that they were not going to give him anything just like that. If he is not going to give anything away, then we will take it in a bad way, which is exactly what our hero decided. They tried to convince him for the last time, but he refused, and they were about to move out. Our hero's friend did not understand what was happening. Will he really ask to hand over the clan to him? They tried to convince our hero that he did not understand who he was dealing with, and that they were not going to give him anything just like that. If he is not going to give anything away, then we will take it in a bad way, which is exactly what our hero decided. His determination surprised his friends. Is he really ready to go there now without preparation? 3 friends were riding horses along a city street. Some people looked around, looking at them. Our hero was warned that their behavior could most likely land them in trouble. Our hero was surprised that his friend admitted that something might not work out for them, because he can always make eyes at him. He decided that he needed time to lure away a gang of 4 of me without starting to drink and eat. The heroes looked contentedly at their friends. He expected them to have approximately the same reaction. He sat contentedly on his horse. Our hero noted that they had already arrived. There is very little left. This temple was obviously incredibly old. Near the red wooden gate, our 3 heroes were about to enter it. Without ceremony, our hero began to bang on the front door to see at least someone as quickly as possible. We didn't have to wait long. Almost immediately, an old man with gray hair and an angry face opened the door and asked what the hell was going on here. As soon as he noticed who was in charge here, his face froze. He absolutely did not expect to see this particular person here. This was our hero, 4 young master. He confidently looked straight into the old man's face. The old man immediately bowed his head to the master. Such formalities always amused our hero. He asked where Mogden Payon is now. They told him that he was now eating. Our hero was asked if they could give him something. He replied that there was no need for this and that he would give everything he wanted. He continued to look at our heroes while their faces were already tense from the upcoming fight. The boss was sitting at the table. In his hand was a flask of alcohol which he poured into himself. Our hero opened the door with his foot. It turned out that God first saw the soul of our hero, only then his face. Overall, his face was surprised. He didn't intend to see anyone at all now. No one was supposed to come through here, and he was not waiting for anyone. He was obviously very angry. A glass flask of alcohol, which only a second ago had been in his hand, was already flying along the table. The flask never broke. It ended up in the hand of one of our three heroes. The boss looked surprised. To pull off such a trick, you need to be a great master. Our hero held a flask of alcohol and looked smugly into the boss's face. "Boss, it will be very bad now." He found out who it was. He greeted Hek Renwung. It was also impossible not to notice that behind him were two apparently his comrades, which was also alarming. The archer looked at the boss. He clearly didn't like him as a person, much less as a leader. The boss asked our hero why he was hanging out with such an idiot like him, and pointed his finger in the direction of our archer. Our hero became wary. He didn't expect that the manufacturer looked so much like a bandit. "Well, that means you'll have to talk to him." Our hero took the table and prepared to sit down and start a conversation with him. The boss's manners left much to be desired. His feet were on the table among the plates and cups. "Well, that means I will behave in the same way," our hero decided, and also put his feet up on the table. "You absolutely don't understand what's going on." The boss asked why the hell our hero ended up with his friends. Our hero replied that maybe this archer is coming, but he's currently his right hand, so only he can call him that. The boss took a few more sips of alcohol. There was no point in stopping now. The boss belched furiously. It was more like the roar of a lion than the sound a man makes. However, it smelled far from pleasant. It reminded our hero of the smell of a corpse. The boss once again asked why the hell our hero came here with his friends. Now a tube appeared in his hands. It was handmade and looked extremely expensive. He took a long breath, looking at our hero, expecting to hear some incredible, interesting answer. Our team absolutely did not change its face when looking at the boss. Our hero replied that he was here to return what belonged to him. The boss pulled the pipe out of his mouth. He expected to hear any answer other than this. "For heaven's gang." It was to bring her back that our hero returned here. The boss clearly did not like this proposal. He immediately stood up from the chair he was sitting on. The boss couldn't believe what he just heard. Does he really want to enter the receiver competition? Our hero put his hand on the table. The For Heaven's Gang was his creation and he came for it. He told the boss to get an official military unit and join the Eastern Star Palace. The boss laughed in front of him. All this seemed to him some kind of absurd madness. I got to know our hero as a completely different person. He couldn't believe that he organized all this and could manage it. Our hero was unperturbed. He only wanted to hear agreement from the boss. The boss called our hero a bastard. He still couldn't believe what he was being told. The boss grabbed the phone. If only recently it was for entertainment, but in the hands of a skilled warrior, it has already become a weapon. With a loud cry, he rushed at our hero, trying to hit him in the face with this pipe. Such an attack did not greatly shock our hero. With a deft movement of his finger, he was able to stop the movement of the tube. The boss was furious. He continued to yell, trying to unbalance our hero. The swing of his left hand slipped past his left ear, but then our hero was able to grab the fist that was intended for his face. There was no problem stopping this blow. The boss clearly underestimated our hero. The boss froze in bewilderment. This cretin, in his opinion, should not have known such techniques. The hero's eyes glowed red. It seems that he was finally angry at such disrespect for his person. He finally raised his left hand to strike back, which would put an end to their conversation. A deft slap to the boss's face made him spit out some blood from his mouth. The boss shouted that our hero did not dare behave like that with him as the leader of the clan. Our hero slapped him now with his right hand. The boss had completely lost his balance and was now on the verge of falling. Sitting astride the former leader of the clan, he beat the crap out of him with his fists right in the face. The reaction of our hero's friends was not the same. However, it looked impressive, and the boss's face was already greatly distorted from the injuries he had received. He was pathetic and was already begging to stop. But our hero didn't care. He continued to slap his boss's cheeks. He decided to summarize everything. He asked again who is now the head of the clan. He replied that this is Kangdae Sheik. What was generally unexpected was that our hero thought that he was the head. He couldn't believe what he heard. Then why did he beat this one up now? The sun was already setting behind the roof of the monastery. The sky was illuminated by a pleasant glow of pink. Our three heroes climbed onto their horses and prepared for the long journey. Our hero continued to think about the name that was given to him. Obviously, this name was already familiar to him. He asked his traveler if he was a member of the Dark Shadow Gang, a squad of assassins. He was told that yes, and besides, he is also a high-level master. In addition, they noted that he has a bad reputation, which is why he works for a long time, hiding behind his name. Our hero noted that for him, being the leader of such a terrible clan is a waste of time. Our archer, however, perked up. He asked, "Are they really going to go to Kangdae Shik right now?" Our hero, in principle, it would be possible, but he is hungry, so we'll do it a little later, but now we need to eat. Our hero remembered the moment when he managed to stop the pipe with his finger. It's good that he learned the scale armor technique in time. He then remembered the moment of the fight when he used the 9 divine moon art. It turned out pretty good. It seemed to him that he managed to beat the boss too easily, which means that his combat skills were not at a high enough level. And this meant only one thing. You need to become even stronger. Our hero understood this perfectly well, so he only thought about it. A man stood in the temple courtyard. He wanted to see Hector and Una and called him a son of a bitch. His gang was behind him. These cutthroats looked extremely dangerous. His arrival took our hero by surprise. He was sleepy and clearly not ready to receive this kind of guest. Nevertheless, he went down to them. He stood opposite and looked the man in the face. The man warned our hero that they didn't have to fight. He also warned that the situation could worsen. Our hero didn't care anymore. He framed his hair in a hairstyle so that it would not get tangled during battle and was ready to fight with anyone. The offended guest ordered that they not listen to him and immediately start fighting with him. He was furious. Obviously, the insult has not gone away from him anywhere these days. The enemy prepared to strike. His foot even pressed a little on the asphalt underneath him. The warrior's eyes shone. Apparently in front of him was a great martial artist ready to strike. The warrior was focused. He was ready to show what his demonic sect skills were worth. Our hero was unperturbed. He was ready to be attacked first. He did not think that his opponent would succumb to his tricks so easily. He asked the leader of the Khan where his weapon was. His opponent really had no weapon in his hands. His opponent replied that if he took up a weapon, our hero would lose a limb. Our hero liked it. He realized that they were looking down on him. His opponent replied that according to the rules of Murim, the weak are allowed to use the enemy's weapon if the enemy is stronger. Since their last meeting, the only progress that his opponent noticed was that our hero learned to scratch with his tongue more confidently. The offended master still could not calm down. He quickly wanted to see reprisal against our hero. The mighty warrior was obviously too confident in his abilities. He gave our hero the right to strike first. He decided not to waste time, so he had to strike himself. Our hero took a fighting stance. Taking off from his place, he ran towards the enemy. His movements were lightning fast and sharp. Our hero continued to look straight into the eyes of the enemy even while running. Obviously, he demonstrated a speed that no one was ready for. He wanted to end everything with one blow. Our hero took off and was ready to strike the final chord in the battle with the enemy. He was moving too fast. The enemy could not even understand where exactly our hero was now and from which side he was going to attack. The enemy stood puzzled. The place where our hero had just been was now empty. He knew that this technique of the gloomy shadow gang was called the ghost walk. But he didn't understand how the fourth young master could know these techniques. Someone flashed behind him. He turned around, believing that the enemy was there. But everything happened too quickly. He could not determine where his opponent would be now. Turning around once again, he froze in amazement. Obviously, the enemy was already landing his blow. He realized that he was in trouble. Our hero has already collected all the Chai energy in his hand to deliver that one blow that will end their fight. He struck with the palm of the Dark Buddha and the fight ended. As our heroes wanted, he ended the fight with one blow. Our hero almost pierced his opponent's stomach with his hand. The Dark Buddha strike was an incredibly complex technique with destructive power. It's incredible that this blow happened. Our hero did not think that he had enough energy to get this blow right. The energy pulsated through the hand and through the fist reached the enemy. Most likely he will remember this blow for the rest of his life. The enemy flew 15 meters away from the hero, planning to land right on his ass. If one of his friends saw this duel, then there will be plenty of reasons for a joke. The offended master who brought his friend as a warrior realized that he was in trouble and his plan did not work. The rest of those present watched with curiosity as the warrior soared above the ground after the crushing blow dealt to him by the master with red hair. He finally landed. The warrior was large, so the sound of the fall was deafening, and yet it was a complete defeat. The defeated master lay on the ground. He continued to try to understand what happened and how they could knock him out with just one blow. Our hero continued to take a steep fighting stance and headed towards the offended master, who now stood completely confused. He called the Mog to his place, using only one finger, the same one that he stopped the receiver. The boss probably remembers this finger, and so they stood opposite each other. The former boss reported that he came up and greeted his master. The hero was pleased that he did not have to look for the true boss of the clan and was brought to him himself. He assumed that since the former boss had completed this task, he would be able to join this clan. The boss didn't know what to answer. He did not have a great desire to join the clan, but to refuse meant to get hit in the face again. He once again remembered those very moments when he was slapped across the face like a boy. Our hero took the silence as agreement and welcomed the new clan of the Gang of Four Heavens. He had no choice but to agree. He bowed his head and simply thanked him for being received. Our hero decided that it was not worth wasting time. He immediately said that the new member of the clan would train and obey all orders from himself, Bushona. He, in turn, was already ready to train new students because he had planned an interesting system for training in his head. The training will be hellishly difficult. In fact, they will become new people by overcoming such difficulties. Several masters were called Sabusion. They all looked in his direction in surprise. The training was successful. Our hero noted that no concessions were applied to the new members of the clan, and they were trained to the fullest. The face of the temple always betrayed a little piece of confidence to our hero. He again noticed how beautifully the sculpture was carved at the top at the base. The hero, after a tired day, fell onto his bed. He looked tiredly at the ceiling, trying to analyze all the events of today. Today he managed a combo of the Dark Buddha Palm Strike and the 9 Divine Moon Art. He didn't expect them to work immediately after using the Ghost Walk. The picture of the battle again appeared before his eyes. How incredibly good he was today. At the moment, the main problem was that he could only use it when the enemy relaxed his guard. In his opinion, using this now against some master would be too risky, and yet you have to survive. Several weeks have passed. At the training ground, the stomping of several clan disciples could be heard running away. The two masters watched as all the students, running in a circle, repeated the fighting movements. Some of them already seemed very tired. No, some have already literally fallen off their feet. Sweat ran down their tired faces. A thought was spinning in a circle in the young warrior's head. He didn't understand why the hell he agreed to all this. His teacher, one of the two masters who taught martial arts, shouted at them, asking why they stopped increasing the tempo. His friend noted that Sobun Xian has become more and more reliable since he became the deputy leader of the units. Our hero addressed them from behind. He asked not to give these lazy people any liberties to demand the maximum from them. Our archer teacher was completely satisfied with this. He obviously liked this approach to business. Our hero decided to share his thoughts. He noted that managing the unit is not so easy. He decided that since he became the new leader of the gang, he needed to choose a new name for it. First of all, he asked what about the name Black Lion. They told him that this was the first time they had heard about the Black Lion. Our hero's dream is to make the future of the divine cult better. Therefore, he decided to choose a new name that characterizes the changes. He had a scroll in his hands. Apparently, he has already prepared something to show. He had a new symbol in his hands. His friend looked at him in surprise. He did not expect such initiative and quick decision-making on the part of his commander. He looked at the symbol. It really was a black lion. It just seemed like he was made of flames. The hero looked contentedly at the result. He plagiarized this logo from his real life, but no one here knew about it. However, in his opinion, his clan was still too weak. He again returned to reasoning about how to strengthen it. According to the lists he was given, he managed to attract about 30 archers to train his new gang. But in order for their gang to be considered a full-fledged unit, at least 100 people are needed. He asked his friend how soon the demonic pavilion's release ceremony would take place. He was interested in the geniuses from all the demonic cults that would be there. His friend did not understand why they would not want to join his clan, to which our hero handed him a small book, obviously indicating what is this. When he opened the book, he couldn't believe his eyes. He even asked if his friend was joking now. Our hero clarified that of course he was not joking. He also asked for help in finding a blacksmith. We are transported to the demonic pavilion where the graduation ceremony takes place. The students greeted each other and congratulated them on completing their studies. Everyone was dressed in the same ceremonial attire. The Fire Dragon division was known for its wealth among all other divisions. The man representing the clan invited everyone to undergo an interview. Some students turned in surprise towards the approaching men. They clearly didn't expect to see anyone here without ceremonial robes. Several soldiers were marching in line, representing a clan about which none of the current graduates knew absolutely anything. They carried a huge banner. It depicted a black lion presented on a gray background. The banner was of impressive size. On the heads of the horsemen who carried the banner were masks made in the style of a lion. Their clothes were visually much cooler than those who were already here. The students began to whisper. Someone said that these were representatives of the Black Lion clan, but almost no one had heard anything about this. Everyone was amazed that the warrior's armor was made of black. Everyone knew the fact that armor of this color in production costs almost as much as gold, but it looked really amazing. The warriors amazed with their appearance, and it was clear that it was catastrophically expensive. We fast forward a little. The sun was already setting behind the roof of the monastery in which our heroes were located. There were scattered clothes on the floor. Obviously, this was the armor that our heroes had only recently worn. Everyone was lying around incredibly tired and seemed unable to move at all. Only our hero tried to sit leaning on his hands. It was incredibly difficult. Our hero noted that he almost died from the fatigue of wearing such heavy armor. The archer also noted that he now understood why archers generally do not wear such heavy armor on a regular basis. They did everything as our hero asked. Now they asked if his plan was working. The hero replied that of course his plan would work, delivering a clear, intense message, the basis of marketing. They looked at him and didn't understand what he was talking about. But really, in this world there hasn't even been such a word yet. The hero replied that there is no need to worry. You just need to wait and they will definitely receive an answer. There were many craftsmen standing in the courtyard. To be honest, it would be difficult to even count how many there were. Our heroes looked down on this meeting from above. The masters exchanged stories with a smile and greeted each other joyfully. This was a complete meeting of candidates. Our heroes did not expect that they would be able to gather so many people for candidates to join the gang. Our hero was asked if he was going to accept them all into the gang. The idea is crazy, but suddenly he had such a plan. Our hero replied that of course not. First you need to check their basic physical strength and select only those who are worthy of staying. Our hero again plunged into his thoughts. He realized that he was going again to the darkness of Rome, a unit whose symbol would be a logo from his modern world. Moreover, he managed to lure his partners, 2 skilled warriors. So things are going well for him after all. When he realized that he was finished with his unit, it was time to improve his influence and position within the family. He realized that he was ready to meet his main rival, the second young master, Hek Renjin. We are transported back to the temple. It was a sunny and bright day. Our hero crossed his arms in greeting of his guest. It was his sister. He noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. A few meters away from him stood a figure wrapped in a cloak and looking somewhere towards the mountains. When she turned around, it became obvious that she was an incredibly beautiful girl, dressed in a white dress. Our hero realized that first he needed to deal with the one who plans to found an alliance with the second young master, namely with the third young mistress. The mistress immediately assured him that if he was here to beg for his life, he could immediately get lost. Our hero objected to his sister. He said that he was here to offer her an alliance and not to fight. The sister deftly noticed that he had no powerful abilities or power. The only thing he has is money from his family from the Rahu clan. Therefore, she does not understand what he can offer her. Moreover, he must simply beg her to save his life in order to leave here in one piece. Apparently, no one in this world was happy to see him. Our hero repeated it again. He came here to offer an alliance on equal terms, so he is ready to make an offer that she cannot refuse. The sister did not want to listen to him. She simply told him to return to the Eastern Star Palace if he wanted to live a little longer. As she was leaving, she heard her brother tell her that the second young master had chosen from the first young master. Our hero hoped that these words would make his sister stop. He noted that at least she stopped, so his words had an effect. He began to outline his plan. He proposed to enter into an alliance with the second young master who has no support. This information greatly surprised his sister. She asked where he got it from. Our hero replied that he couldn't say that. And in fact, he cannot say that he himself invented and wrote this short story. His sister was already approaching him. Her facial expression changed greatly to one of cunning and cunning. Once again, I thought about the offer to become his ally. It was unclear whether she was seriously considering this proposal, or was she just having fun. Finally, she answered, "Alliance on equal terms, but she won't get anything if she enters into an alliance with him." Our hero replied that is true, but he is also going to invite the Rahu clan to become his allies. The alliance with the clan was an amazing idea. It was the largest in number in the capital. My sister was surprised. How can he lead the alliance with the Chanyu clan when he is not recognized even in the Rahu clan? The brother assured her that he was going to soon correct this state of affairs, because soon he's going to go to the Devil's Dungeon. She couldn't believe what she just heard. Devil's Dungeon? He probably misspoke. This was a place that since its very foundation, for 300 years, no one had yet been able to overcome and get out of there alive. A place where as soon as a person is stupid, he is destined for death. Asked again, "What do you mean he's going to go to the demonic dungeon?" Our hero noted that this is the only way he can show everyone the seriousness of his intentions, so he has nothing left. He also reminded that he was looking forward to her answer regarding joining the clan. He expects to hear an answer after he returns from the dungeon. The head of the clan was sitting on a chair in front of the training camp. His army already inspired the seriousness of his intentions. The hero was reading a book about the training center that was built by the leader of the third generation of heavenly demons. And yet, the thought that he would soon have to go through the dungeon did not leave his head. He needs to do this in order to become a full-fledged investigator of the demonic cult and gain the recognition necessary for a successor. And then the hero was struck by annoying thoughts. He realized that only he himself is to blame for the complexity of his situation, since he is the author of the work in which he is now located. He thought that if he entered the dungeon, his chances of survival would drop sharply to 0. It seemed to him that he simply could not overcome it. He leaned his hand on the railing to at least somehow fix himself in space. The situation seemed extremely tense to him, and yet he had to come to this test in order to survive. He simply has no other choice. He decided he would do it. We are transported to the mountains. Our hero began climbing the mountain. thereby marking the beginning of the test that had recently frightened him so much. Nevertheless, he was here. Even though he was a little scared, he followed his destiny and tried to do everything as cool as possible. Our hero stood in front of the gate. The entrance was guarded by 2 men with weapons, which means there was something valuable with her behind. The guards looked at the guests who approached them. They rarely saw people who dared to take this test. The gates of the lattice began to open. So the test has begun and it's time to accept your fate. Our hero was allowed inside without saying a word to him, most likely just for fear of losing concentration and mood. Our hero once again gathered all his will into a fist. He realized that he would never die here. He would cope and everything would work out for him. The torch illuminated the dungeon tunnels. Like all dungeons, this one was gloomy and wet. The hero illuminated his path, fearing that at every step some danger might await him. He decided it was time. I'll check all my uniform again. Our hero got ready to change clothes before his test. He laid out the suit that he had specially brought on the floor. It included a special jacket and gloves. Putting on this costume of heroes, he still continued to check in his head whether he had forgotten anything in preparation for this mission. When the suit was put on, he realized that all the preparations had already been made, which meant it was time to get down to business. He raised his head. The hero realized that the enemy was approaching him. Devil's Dungeon. So the test has begun. First test, demonic mosquitoes, and they are coming. They sting and send the person with their hallucinogenic saliva. In addition, there are several hundred of them here, and they will sting until they suck out every last drop. But our hero knew that this would happen. Therefore, he took confrontation techniques from the artisans in advance. He threw down the torch and prepared to take the attack. Hundreds of mosquitoes moved towards him, emitting a terrible howl. Hundreds of poisoned mosquitoes flew towards our hero. A few more meters and they will become a serious problem for him. Our hero turned out to be not so simple. In his hands was a special device from which liquid was sprayed aimed at these mosquitoes. The hero screamed with rage. Obviously, it was a please cry because his plan worked and his weapon worked. The insecticide sprayer assembled by the blacksmiths showed itself well in battle. Our hero felt superior. Judging by the fact that all the mosquitoes were lying on the ground, the first test was successfully completed. It turned out to be quite simple. Our hero, dressed in a suit, looked at the corpses of his defeated enemies. There were hundreds of them. Well, they are all dead and lying in front of him. The hero knew that the second young master dealt with these mosquitoes using the art of fire. There was no such technique in his arsenal yet. And even if it didn't look super impressive, it worked very effectively. If you really want to, you can burn them after the battle. The main thing that can be said now is that our hero successfully completed the first test. We are transported to the temple. It was pleasant summer weather. The sun was shining brightly. 2 masters were in a room with huge ceilings. One of them was sitting at a table and waiting for his interlocutor. One of the bottom asked the other a question about his too sluggish appearance. The warrior looked quite formidable and impressive. This was the first young master, Hek-Ren-Gyum. He was told that there was no reason to worry. In the end, the person they were talking about just entered the dungeon. In response, they noted that he himself was planning to enter there next month, and that this would not interfere with his plans. His interlocutor loved the mysterious style of explaining. In the same mysterious vein, he answered the question about his future plans. Our hero's brother did not know what intentions forced him to descend into this cursed dungeon. He also added that he always hates calling this asshole his brother. The interlocutor continued to calmly drink his jasmine tea. It seemed that nothing could unsettle him. He thought about something again. Still, our hero's actions seemed to him something unusual. He suddenly put his hand down with a cup on the table, causing everything in this room to vibrate. The blow was incredibly powerful. But what is more surprising is that for some reason the tea remained in this small cup. Our hero's brother realized that he could now get caught. He did not expect such an aggressive reaction to the conversation. What was his interlocutor thinking? He was thrown from one extreme to another, from complete calm to aggression and uncontrollable anger. Deciding that it was his action that could lead to such anger, he decided that it would be better to apologize, just in case. They reassured him by saying that he had not said anything like that, and in general this was not a reaction to his behavior. He immediately decided to laugh, either because he was nervous or simply didn't know how to react. But in general, he was clearly not happy that his brother appeared in his life again. The unexpected attack took him by surprise. They had just been calmly talking when suddenly they attacked him, showering him with a hail of blows. Our hero's brother tried with all his might to defend himself. I don't understand why he was attacked. The only thing that occurred to him was that information about his brother and about the dungeon should not be spread so freely and was of greater value than he might think. And our hero continued to walk through the dungeon. The lantern helped him serve as a lighting device and did its job perfectly. Our hero suddenly felt chills all over his body. It was very cold in the cave. He understood that now he should start preparing for the next test that the dungeon had in store for him. He checked to see if the amulet that was part of his protective arsenal was still there. Then he bandaged his eyes. I understand that after this there is no turning back. Now you had to move by touch. Our hero probed with his sword where he could go and where it was safe. He drew circles around himself with a sword, checking to see if he was still in the safety zone. Red magical silhouettes shone along the walls. Apparently the second test has already begun. This was the place where every nightmare lurking in the depths of consciousness breaks free. The fog that floats here plays a role in making the worst nightmares seem as realistic as possible. Therefore, our hero cut through the fog of war and cleared his mind. Red silhouettes continued to swirl around him. The test was not over yet. He continued to press his sword into the ground. It became increasingly difficult to maintain calm and balance. And then he took off his mask, believing that this was the end, and perhaps that was the end of it all. The red circles stopped glowing. Now he stood at the entrance. There was no light inside the arch, so it was unclear whether there was any other danger there or not. The hero analyzed his duel. He again used a different method from that used by the second young master. The blood pearl worked. It even began to seem to him that everything was somehow too simple. His face looked calmer now. He opened a flask of liquid. It was not water, but a special liquid collected for one of the dungeon tests. The bottle smelled strongly. I had to cover my nose with my fingers so as not to smell this smell. Moreover, it had to be drunk. The hero returned to his fundamental thought again. In order to survive, you need to do this. There's nothing else left. Now he had a small bottle in his hand. It was necessary to mix these two bottles to achieve the effect that was intended. The hero carefully poured the contents of a small bottle into a container with a liquid that smelled so strongly. All that remains is to put the result on the ground and hope that everything went well. Suddenly a sound came from the left. The sound of the third test that was approaching our hero. He left a bottle of mixed liquids right at the entrance so that his opponent would fall into this trap like a trap. There was very little left, and he would find out whether he managed to figure out how to pass the third test, or whether his plan would not work. Then the hero realized that he could use the gait of a ghost to avoid unnecessary sounds. You can also use scale armor to enhance body protection. A monster began to emerge from the darkness. His hand was similar to a human one, but the claws were incredibly long, about 15 centimeters each. His face was hidden in his hair, so for a moment he couldn't even see the face of this monster that was approaching him. This monster had a long tongue and incredibly scary eyes. His very appearance inspired horror because this is exactly how he came up with this monster. The monster that was in front of him was a representative of the underground monsters. The heroes could not believe that such people even existed. But then he remembered that it was he himself who invented them. The appearance of this monster was more dangerous than that of the previous two tests. Even a great master at the peak of his abilities would not be able to defeat such an opponent so easily. Our hero's main advantage was that his opponent was blind and could only rely on his sense of smell. But since our hero is cunning, he applied a special ointment in advance that would confuse such a specific enemy. The first thing the monster noticed was the vessel from which such an unusual smell was emanating. He approached him. He was truly hypnotized by such an unusual and subtle aroma, which seemed to an ordinary person an incredible stench. Frozen for a second, the monster tried to understand what could emit such a smell and whether he had encountered such a thing before. He realized that they were trying to deceive him. The monster moved his hand along the vessel, causing the flask to fly into the air. The hero was close behind the cover and watched as the monster came into contact with his bait. He realized that the moment had come to attack and jumped straight out of cover on top of the monster. There was no need to attack the monster. The hero mixed in red chili and some volatile substances, so the monster was simply overwhelmed by the very smell of this potion. But just when our hero thought that he had finally won, he looked to the side and saw something. Dozens of similar monsters rushed towards him, but he prepared bait for only one, and he was going to fight with one too. Quickly bending down, our hero tried to hide so as not to be noticed, forgetting that his opponents were so blind. And he tried to at least count how many monsters came to kill him this time. The monsters continued to crawl towards our hero. He continued to not understand what to do with them, and why there were so many of them. He sat and did not move. His body was completely paralyzed. He was afraid to even breathe loudly, realizing that because of this, he could now be torn into several pieces. One of the monsters froze just a few centimeters away. It seemed that he would now turn his head to the left and the story might end abruptly. The monster was hungry, saliva was dripping from his mouth, and he couldn't wait to eat some person. It seemed to our hero that the monster finally paid attention to him and realized where he was, despite the fact that he did not move. The tongue of this dead man was as long and vile as that of the monster that had already been defeated. But this one was with friends. Now the moment of truth has come. Either the monster will leave now or our hero will die. This monster continued to make terrible sounds and dribble saliva from its mouth. What an incredibly disgusting look he had. Suddenly, he rushed straight at our hero. This crazy monster somehow realized where he was. Our hero was shocked. He absolutely did not understand what to do in this situation. The monster's tongue was already touching his neck. Our hero remembered the only weapon he had left from the first test. I had no choice but to try it. The stream of gas directed at the monster's face even turned out to be a surprise for him. I managed to throw the monster away from me at least some distance. The monster raised its hand to fight back, its left hand with huge claws already soaring above it. At the last moment, dodging the blow, our hero dived under the stone behind which he had recently been hiding. He realized that he was not taking out the fight, and needed to move towards the exit from the cave while he was still alive. The monsters didn't even think about stopping. They immediately reacted and rushed to catch up with our hero. Flashing his heels, he ran away from the cave, and I realized that the dead were running in his wake on 4 paws and wanted to devour him. Our warrior realized that the dead were following him by smell, so the idea of applying a poisonous, stinking liquid now seemed rather irrational to him. However, he managed to escape from the cave screaming, gaining some kind of cosmic speed. The hero was glad that his training was not in vain. This vile creature on 4 limbs will never catch up with him. And then he appeared, the largest and most dangerous representative of this type of monster. And he turned out to be very close. Judging by his eyes, he was also blind, but he clearly understood by the smell where his victim was. At least he was looking straight at her. Our hero cursed to himself, and not to himself either. This is clearly not how he imagined it all. Having made incredible efforts, he pushed off the ground, deciding that if he carried out an unexpected technique, he could still change the outcome of the battle. He soared above the ground. The enormous rage filled him with strength and also betrayed his confidence in his idea. All that was left was to dive to the ground and strike. Whether it works or not is no longer important. The blow was of enormous force. The monster was thrown above the ground. Give our hero some time for the next attack. The monster was unhappy. It was not going to spend a lot of effort to defeat its victim, but apparently it would have to try a little. He started yelling louder. You had to manage to make him so angry. It seemed to the monster that he had finally grabbed onto something and could pull him towards him. He was in for disappointment. In his clawed paw there were only clothes that he managed to tear off. But our hero was already running away from the monster at full speed, leaving behind his clothes and sword and everything he had with him. The hero realized that he had miscalculated his strength a little. This heavenly demon turned out to be somehow incredibly strong, built himself a dungeon, and also crammed these damn creatures everywhere. Crazy zombies who looked like a grandfather continued to chase our hero without slowing down. For both grandfather and a zombie, he ran quite well. Finally, there was a way out of the cave. There was very little left and it would be possible to end this adventure, which had suddenly gotten out of control. I had to stop abruptly. Even despite the fact that a huge monster was chasing behind, before the next move, it was necessary to prepare. Our hero knew that even the second young master climbed this rock not without problems, which means he would have problems too. There was no time left to think. A little more and the heavenly demon will catch up with him and will no longer grab onto his clothes, but right up to the hero. You just had to jump in. The distance was great, but this was the only test on the way to salvation from the monster. Having accelerated as quickly as possible, our hero made a jump, hoping that his strength would be enough. The zombie grandfather tried for the last time to grab his target, which was so rapidly escaping from him. Stretching out his hand in his direction, he felt that he had almost achieved his goal. There was very little left. But then our hero finally pushed off from the edge of the cliff and made this amazing jump. He only needed a couple of tens of meters to finally say goodbye to this nightmare, which most likely wanted to eat him. All that remains is to fly. Even during the flight, he realized that he would succeed. He was very glad that he listened to the advice of the Jan Morian and studied the technique of dark wings. Upon returning home, he will need to be generously rewarded. And then it became clear that everything was not going so smoothly. The flight path of our hero literally did not coincide very slightly with the point where he needed to land. He reached out as best he could, trying to catch his hand on the stone, but unfortunately the stone did not reach out to him in response. A few centimeters separated our hero's hand from a stone that could be grabbed and hung on. The hero was frankly unlucky. This is how the whole fall began. He screamed without even understanding why he was screaming, because most likely in a few seconds he would die by crashing. Our hero flew to the very bottom of the cave. Finally he fell. A loud sound was heard, filling the entire cave with echoes. Nothing was visible through the dust. The mystery remained. Did our hero manage to survive after such a long fall? The fingers on his hands did not move. The hand didn't move either. Perhaps he didn't move at all anymore. But no, he was lucky. He survived. Right now he was in shock that he managed to survive such a fall. Our warrior stood up. If not for the scale armor technique, he would definitely not have been able to survive the fall from such a height. There was only one unresolved question: how to climb back up now. The hero noticed that along the cave, blue stones were glowing, as if illuminating the path somewhere, perhaps outside. But what surprised him more is that he doesn't remember how he wrote this place in his short story. Now it would be enough for him to just have the previous monsters not appear again, but he could try to figure out everything else. And so, the hero decided to move forward. He walked slowly, expecting danger from all sides and not understanding where he was going. The exit from the cave appeared. As soon as our hero saw him, he was surprised and froze, apparently expecting to see a completely different picture. The view from the gorge was beautiful. A little far above, there was a temple, which apparently he would now have to climb. Looking up, he saw that the fruits on the apple tree were untouched, which means there were no people here. How to climb the steps. He tried to analyze what kind of place this is and why it could be here. After all, he personally wrote a short story about this world. The hero even suggested that this could be the same happy gorge under the rock that he had dreamed about for so long. In order to enter, you had to put your hand in. Perhaps new trials awaited him there. I understand that you just need to apply your palm. Our hero was in no hurry to do this. Now we had to act more carefully. However, he plucked up the courage to put his hand into the hole that was specially there for this purpose. The doors began to open. The entrance to the temple was free. All that was left was to enter. Freezing at the entrance, our hero was borne by the picture that opened in front of him. It was a temple with a monument in the middle. The temple was empty. There were no traces of people. Our hero approached the monument. It turned out to be a sculpture of an old man, next to which lay a sword in a sheath and a sealed scroll. Our hero noticed that there was something written on the stone. This was a message for those who find this cave. The letter said that this sword would belong to the heir who could overcome all the trials of the Devil's Dungeon. All that remained was to open the scroll and find out what kind of secret was hidden in it. Perhaps it carries the greatest value. Upon opening it, our hero was in for a pleasant surprise. It was a scroll with celestial demonic arts. Once upon a time, there lived a man known as the strongest blessed demon in the history of divine cult. Unfortunately, he never passed on his martial arts to his descendants. Our hero read the contents of the scroll in pleasant shock. If this is true demonic art, then he hit the real jackpot. Here, his first disappointment awaited him. The handwriting in which the scroll was written was terrible, and the hero realized that he could only read a small part. I had to take it with me and show it to my secretary, Xian. But the sword looked special. The heroes were in no hurry to expose it, but only looked at it in their hand. The black and gold sword was incredibly beautiful. Handmade and engraved, the choice of these colors, as if fate itself sent this sword into the hands of our hero. He finally pulled the sword out of its sheath and raised it above his head. A ray of light reflected from the blade, although the metal was an unusual black color. Stretching his sword to the sky, the hero realized that he had finally received a weapon with which he could defeat any enemy. Our hero felt like a little boy in a toy store, in which he was told that you could choose the most beautiful and expensive toy. It was a success. Having thoroughly admired his new weapon, he sheathed the sword, a satisfied smile never leaving his face. But appetite comes with eating, so it was worth checking if divine elixirs or any other pills were stored somewhere here. The heroes jumped off the pedestal, jumping almost all the steps at once. His behavior was exactly like that of a small child. He remembered that near the entrance to the cave there were golden apples hanging on the trees, and perhaps it was in them that the divine elixir was hidden. Our hero couldn't wait to try it. He stuffed his mouth with apples like crazy, not yet understanding whether his idea would work at all, or whether he was now just eating apples in huge quantities. Since there was a river with drinking water flowing nearby, it was worth trying out of 5 of it, since magical power could hide there too. Besides, after such nervous battles, I was thirsty. The water from the river seemed crystal clear and tasty, maybe really magical. Having drunk as much as he could, the hero leaned back and realized that the water in the river was just ordinary water. In this case, we had to think about somewhat more pragmatic things. For example, how not to die of hunger. The hero began to shout to the sky, addressing the heavenly demon who founded this treasury. Our hero did not understand why it was impossible to leave at least a couple of magic elixirs. He even emphasized that at the moment, elixirs would be much more useful than heavenly demonic arts written in incomprehensible handwriting. Nevertheless, he continued to explore the treasury. He put his hand to another key in the lock. The door began to gradually open. Judging by the smell that came from this room, no one had been there for a long time. Our hero looked around. This was a real armory room. Blue crystals from the cave were used as decorative lighting, which made this room even more mysterious. Our hero tried to register the weapons he found in this room. 7 blades, 5 short balls that he could distribute to his best warriors. Also in the cave there were 7 spears and a lot of bows. Each weapon was a real work of art. But what attracted most attention was a pair of gloves that mysteriously lay apart from everything else. He noticed that he had seen something called hornless dragon gloves, but was not sure what they were. To the touch, they were similar to the most ordinary leather gloves, only more elastic. Having put them on himself, It became clear that luck was again on his side, since they were the perfect size. The heavenly demon statue was dressed in a black kimono with gold accents. Obviously, it was part of a set of clothes, so it also had to be taken with you. Although the clothes were just hanging on the statue for an incomprehensible amount of time, it should be noted that they were in excellent condition and, moreover, looked cool. Well, there's enough food and water here, so the hero decided that he could rest here until he found a way out. Moreover, this time would be better spent studying the celestial demonic arts. Several weeks have passed. Finally, the time has come to leave this place, but taking everything valuable with you. Our warrior had to build a makeshift bag for the huge amount of weapons that he was going to take with him and distribute to members of his gang. He knew that he had not wasted his time. He was studying martial arts and also practicing with his new sword. It's time to go back. He finally deciphered some information from the scrolls. It indicated how to get out of this place. The catch was that it didn't say where exactly this exit led, but there was nothing left to do but check. The sun was already blinding our hero and did not allow him to look around. Someone dropped a stick. This man was a traveler who did not expect to see anyone at the exit of the cave. Our hero left the cave. The man who dropped the stick was the first living person he had seen in weeks. The old man didn't look dangerous, so without a shadow of embarrassment, you could simply approach him and ask where he was. This old man looked at his interlocutor in surprise, not only at his face, but also at his clothes. He said something about the successor of the heavenly demon who descended on us. Without having time to ask again what this old man meant, he threw down all the sticks he had collected and began to bow before the warrior. It didn't take long for an explanation. This old man noticed that our hero was wearing the robe of a heavenly demon, and in his hand was a demonic sword. So in front of him was the heir of the heavenly demon. What happened next was not entirely clear. The old man bowed, making our hero think about the value of the things he found in the cave. Just a few seconds later, he stood up sharply, as if he remembered that he had some business that he had forgotten about. Before he had time to ask the old man at least one more question, our hero looked at the back of the running grandfather, not understanding what was on his mind and whether he could help with anything. There was nothing left to do but think that the old man was running away for help. At least one could hope so. We are returning to the city. Several weeks have passed since our hero went into the dungeon. The weather was sunny and clear. There was not a single cloud in the sky. It was about time something happened. Our hero's friends were worried about him, but did not lose hope that he would pass the test and be able to return. Suddenly they heard something. People were inexplicably happy about something. The archer suggested that perhaps today is a holiday that they forgot about. Finally, they managed to find a person who will explain why everyone is so delighted. It turns out that the successor of the heavenly demon has appeared. A few days ago, a flag was raised in the devil's dungeon. Yes, our heroes realized what they had just heard. The devil's dungeon was exactly the place where their friend had gone a few weeks ago. No longer able to restrain themselves, they fled to the epicenter of events, trying to understand who exactly this successor of the heavenly demon was. Of course, he turned out to be the head of our gang. He was carried in their arms and greeted joyfully. He himself also smiled and greeted everyone. He felt like a real star. In the real world, he only experienced something like this when he went to rock concerts. It remained a mystery why someone was at the exit from the dungeon. Was someone always waiting for the successor of the heavenly demon? These thoughts haunted me, but now they could be put off until later. Finally, we are transported to the Palace of the Eastern Star, the abode of our heroes. Our gang leader sat down on a chair and gave himself the opportunity to complain out loud about how tired he had been over the past few weeks. Nevertheless, his friends still did not understand where he had been for so long. Besides, they didn't understand what the story was with the heir. Nevertheless, his companions were glad to see him. The fact that he appeared today, and thus was in any case a pleasant surprise. These questions made our hero remember the trials that he had to endure in the cave. The first test, deadly mosquitoes, everything went more or less smoothly due to the fact that he was prepared. The second test, the red fog of fear, was also passed thanks to the fact that I was well prepared. There were already problems on the third test, so I had to run away. And yet, it was flight that led him to the Founder's Temple, where he received his main artifacts. His friend listened with amazement to the stories about what happened in the dungeon. He could not believe that a secret of this kind would be hidden there. His second comrade-in-arms couldn't believe it either. The dungeon was built about 300 years ago, and our hero is the first who managed to obtain the secrets buried there. And then it dawned on him that this was not very good. After all, he just wanted to lie low and surprise everyone at the end with his sudden appearance, as happens in dramas. It is not surprising that his friends reacted with misunderstanding to his idea of hiding from view. They thought that becoming the successor of the heavenly demon was an honor for every warrior. My friend had to explain that this was already too great an honor. Due to the fact that he received the title, more opponents should appear. Next, he had to think to himself, It was bad not only that he deviated from the main plot, but also became the successor of the Heavenly Demon. Now he had to solve another question. What would the second young master do? After all, he will almost certainly want to meet him soon, and our hero was not yet ready for his level of skill. It's not a fact that everything is going according to plan, but it was already too late to change anything. For that matter, all that remains is to wait. Our hero was in thought. He asked his bro to hit the road and collect some things. He also asked not to forget to give the silver to the residents. Bro agreed. The leader of the new organized gang asked the archer how the training was going. It was extremely important to keep this part of the unit under control. If Kabu-sen and Jiang Murian join forces, and they will create a new direction in knife fighting. They will be able to make a Murima technique similar to modern special forces knife fighting techniques. Our warrior asked to postpone close combat training for now, and said that the priority now is to learn survival skills. So he was going to arrange a meeting in the evening and see everything there. He also asked to invite his former boss to the meeting. Friends did not understand why this bastard was invited to the meeting. But our hero had one little thing for him. The clear moon was shining. The sky was cloudless, so the stars in the sky were clearly visible. It was a pleasant summer night. The meeting took place in the main ceremonial hall. It was attended by everyone our main character wanted to see, even the former head of the clan. He clearly didn't like being here. He didn't even understand why he was invited to such a meeting. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, the head of the gang gave a command to the servants. He demanded that something be brought into the hall. The box was incredibly heavy, so 4 people had to carry it at once. They immediately brought the golden chest into the room. The box itself was made in an unusually expensive design, which means there could be nothing simple or cheap in it. The box crashed to the floor. Everyone in the room looked at him expectantly, trying to guess what was inside, but none of them succeeded. The great tactician asked the gentleman what was in front of them. He saw what was in the weapon box, but still did not understand what was special about it. Our hero explained that this was equipment that he took from the dungeon. He noticed that it did not look like a regular weapon. It's time for a generous gesture. He invited all meeting participants to choose what they liked best. His friends didn't believe what they heard. If it really was a weapon from the dungeon left behind by a heavenly demon, then it was of incredible value. It was also flattering that no matter how precious these products seemed, they could not compare with the talents of his charges. Of course, he was immediately thanked for such a generous gesture. Surely everyone has already chosen with their eyes the weapon they want to own. The sword was chosen first. It was made in the same black and gold style and was inlaid with precious stones, although it was an incredibly dangerous weapon. Naturally, the archer found himself a bow. It is not surprising that it was also made in black and gold. Judging by the archer's satisfied smile, the quality of the bow was excellent. The great tactician faced a difficult choice, since he did not have a favorite weapon. But our hero already had a weapon in mind that he was going to personally hand over to his tactician. He handed him the ring. He also explained that this is a dark dragon ring, which means it can do the same as the blood poison pearl. A truly deadly and useful weapon. His tactician was incredibly touched by such a gift. He never expected that someone could ever give him such a valuable thing. The last person left without a gift, it was the former boss. Even now he was counting on the fact that something would fall into his hands. I had to apologize because there was nothing for him. The only thing our hero has prepared for his former boss is a special task. It was necessary to sell off the remaining Sky Demon artifact. Of course, this is a bonus, since the Mock family has always been well-versed in weapons. The boss was a little upset. Of course, he already expected that they would give him some kind of weapon, but the bonus was already at least something. I had to calm him down a little and assure him that the bonus was definitely waiting for him. And in general, they asked him to relax a little, as he looked too tense. Another reason to make fun of your former boss while using his ability to good use. So far, everything was going great. We fast forward a little. The sun was directly above the temple. It was a hot summer day. Our hero's sister confidently walked along the temple corridor heading to meet her brother. She couldn't believe the news she recently heard. Could it be that her brother became the heir of the heavenly demon after passing through the devilish dungeon? Her brother greeted her. At least in his new image, he always expressed respect and a sign of greeting. Once he was scolded for forcing the meeting, he wordlessly handed something to his sister. This was the seal of the Rahu clan. Our hero's sister asked whether he had already reached them or not. He replied that of course yes, because he always keeps his word. And he reminded that now it was his sister's turn. She continued to not understand what was happening to her brother, realizing that she had underestimated him in vain. She asked how he received the clan's recognition. Haroev thought that at this moment he could lie a little. On the other hand, there was no need for this. So he decided to tell everything as it really happened. He said that the clan head didn't care that he was the successor of the heavenly demon. He was able to gain his recognition through precious gifts, priced as much as hornless dragon's gloves. He also tried to calm his sister down. He assured that he wanted to have an alliance only with her, and not with the clan. The sister considered her brother impudent. On the other hand, with his behavior he reminded her of another person she knew. As a result, she agreed to his proposal for a union, although she was not entirely sure of the correctness of her action. Everything went according to plan. Our hero thanked his sister and said that he expected her help in the future. Again, the monastery of the second disciple. The sun was already setting below the horizon. The second student enjoyed the weather and the pleasant breeze that blew his long hair. The interior of his room was incredibly cozy and modern. It was felt that he personally had a hand in the design of this room. He tried to think through the information he had recently received. News reached him about the union in which our hero and his sister joined. The second student was amused by the situation. He thought that our hero was taking this race seriously. From the excess tension, energy began to ooze from his hand. The fire of his ki almost burned through the railing on which he was leaning. The second student stopped in time, realizing that he was wasting his energy. Steam was still coming from his hand. The thought that the head of the clan would now be angry with him could not leave him, which means we had to come up with something. The light reflected from the rock as if it were made not of stone but of glass. Despite the fact that it was a deserted place, you could clearly hear someone moving along these stones. The new mysterious hero climbed to the top of this small rock to take a look around. His clothes, hairstyle, and weapons showed him to be a skilled warrior. Although, of course, he was not an easy warrior. This was the main character of the short story Mukwan, the one who will have to defeat our hero. Taking the weapon in his hands, he prepared to move towards new adventures. He couldn't wait to get back to doing his favorite thing, killing the villains and all his other enemies. Having accelerated to a monstrous speed, he prepared to jump to leave this place. Jumping off the cliff, he threw himself into the ocean and swam towards new adventures. There was no one else on the rock. One can only guess where the main character of the story went and who he will meet. It was an impenetrable forest. A tall, dense forest that made it difficult to look around and understand exactly where you were. The main character walked along it trying to understand how he got into such an ass. This place was clearly not the center of civilization. Finally, he heard something. There was no point in him worrying about his safety, so he could immediately go to meet the sounds he heard. After walking a little, he realized that these sounds were made by people. This means you can ask them where to go. His joy knew no bounds. For 2 whole days, he wandered aimlessly through these forests, trying to figure out how to get out. Even great warriors can get lost in the forest. These were typical looters. Instead of robbing and knocking down men, mistreating women, even mocking the elderly. Simply put, these were real scoundrels. Our new hero swooped down from the sky like a hawk. What he saw was enough for him to enter into battle with these scoundrels without warning. Although these marauders were warriors and had weapons, their combat training was very different from that of our warrior. Hitting the back of the head with his foot, he landed the biggest scoundrel with one blow. He didn't even have time to understand anything. Having fallen to the ground, he flew a few meters somersaulting. Such an incredible force was struck against him. Our hero was clearly not joking. He apologized for not being able to break in time. Apparently, he decided to start the conversation with his new friends with a joke. Disgruntled thugs surrounded him. They tried to understand what kind of brave idiot decided to attack an entire gang alone. He admitted that he was a little lost. Also, since he had been wandering here for 2 whole days and he could use some food. The thugs immediately realized that they were being mocked and rushed to attack. The bald thug swung his sword, intending to cut our hero in half. It is quite obvious that it was not difficult for him to easily come back from the blow of such an inept idiot. He took 1 step to the right. Now he had to temporarily bear the blow. A crushing blow from the right hand to the stomach instantly neutralized his opponent, forcing him to even drop his weapon. Now the second enemy was lying face down on the ground. It only took him a few seconds. Our hero admitted that he just wanted to ask for some food and move on. Apparently, even great warriors did not enjoy fighting on an empty stomach. But since he came across bandits, he cannot just pass by. He turned his attention to the victims of the bandits. Apparently, it was a rich merchant. He said that if our hero defeats these bandits, he will reward him generously. A dozen thugs were already ready to tear him apart. Nevertheless, the hero was only worried about whether the merchant would keep his word. The villain rushed to attack, and waving their combat swords, they intended to finish this duel as quickly as possible. Our hero stood calmly. There were only a few meters left before the bandits, but he had not even taken his sword out of its sheath yet. His endurance was amazing. He knew that he needed to remain calm and take a fighting stance, and then his skill would do its job. The Sky Dragon's spirit appeared behind him. Great power was locked in this young warrior. The villain, wanting death, swung his sword at our hero, but he was already ready to repel all attacks. His blade slid through the air, cutting everything in its path. The blood didn't even have time to stick to his ball. Immediately, all opponents were defeated with 1 blow. They clearly didn't understand who they were dealing with. The merchant could not believe what he had just seen. Did this warrior really defeat all the bandits with one blow? However, it was clear from his face that he was not doing so well. Apparently, this was the effect of the 3-day hunger. The merchant immediately rushed to his savior. He immediately offered his help. I was worried that his savior might now become unusable. He again complained of hunger and asked if there was anything edible. Apparently, the battle with the scoundrels took away the last of my strength. The man whom he had just passed handed him 2 ripe fruits. It seemed to him that this was the most beautiful thing he had seen in the last 2 days. Don't waste a second. Our hero rushed to devour the fruit without even having time to really live through it. The most delicious fruits in the world. The merchant tried to analyze by the appearance of our hero who he really is. The shabby clothes and martial arts skills indicated that he was definitely some kind of master who had come down from the mountains after years of studying martial arts. The man greeted him and introduced himself. Then he asked where our hero was going. He replied that he was heading to the Marinsky Alliance, but got lost. Fortunately, the people he saved were also heading there, so now they were on their way. They promised to provide the hero with food and lodging in gratitude for his rescue. Things were finally looking up for him. They asked him how old he was. This year he turned 30 years old. The merchant said that he did too, so it turns out that they are the same age and can do without formalities. Solemn fireworks lit up the sky above the temple, which was already festively decorated with the color of the turned-on lamps. All the representatives of our protagonist's new gang gathered in the courtyard of the monastery, and he himself sat in the distance. Our hero looked contentedly at his creation, a new clan that he created himself. Today was the first day that the Black Lion unit started operating, and concurrently, this was the first day when he was truly recognized as a leader. His sister came to greet him along with other important representatives. The reason he invited her to the inauguration was to let Second Young Master know about their union. My sister was worried about this part of the plan. She warned that Jean Oraboni is an unusual person and should beware. Apparently this man scared even his sister. Our hero was well aware of this. After all, he himself wrote the novella and this character too. Then he realized that someone was calling him. The voice seemed somehow familiar to him. His brother stood in front of him. He still did not understand that our hero had changed and treated him like the previous version of him. He was much larger and more powerful. A great stately warrior who was created specifically to contrast with our simple and expressionless hero. His sister looked at him tensely. Apparently all family members had strained relationships. Without having time to understand anything, our hero already found himself hugged in a friendly manner by his brother. He was praised for being able to become the successor of the heavenly demon. All he could do was play along. While he had to carry out part of his plan, he was not going to react sharply to anything. All clan members looked at the family squabble with puzzlement. The spectacle was extremely curious and interesting. The sister continued to look at her older brother with displeasure. She had a theory that he was here to restrain their younger brother. Suddenly another unexpected guest walked towards them. His gait was different from everyone else and was almost silent. Thin curls of hair fluttered in the wind. It was soft and silent, like the movement of some wild animal. Approaching the 2 brothers from behind, at first they didn't even pay attention to him and didn't turn around. Then he decided to initiate the conversation by placing his hand on the shoulder of our protagonist. He was in complete shock. He didn't understand who else could come to the ceremony and behave so brazenly. The elder brother greeted the new guest. Now there was no mystery left about who was behind him. He said that as a member of the divine cult, and as an elder brother, he wholeheartedly congratulated the new master of the clan. The next phrase surprised him even more. The guest told our hero that he deserved his respect. It was necessary to greet the guest. The second young master was the main rival of the novel's protagonist, and one of the most dangerous warriors. Our hero did not understand what to do. He expected danger from the main protagonist, but the antagonist was no less dangerous. To his surprise, his guest was extremely polite and had not yet shown any aggression. No matter how much our hero tries to train and improve his skills, this opponent will never be within his strength and he will not be able to defeat him. He caught himself thinking that in a different situation, he would have been able to obey the second young master without any problems in order to stay alive. But now the situation was different, and it was necessary to continue to play our role. Our hero sighed and continued the conversation. Colorful fireworks continued to light up the sky. It was necessary to figure out how to get home as quickly as possible. There was a full moon in the sky. The day dedicated to the inauguration ceremony has finally come to an end. Inside, the Sky Dragon weapon auction was beginning. It was a weapon that no one had seen for over 300 years. It was once again emphasized to auction participants that the opportunity to acquire one of these weapons comes once in a lifetime. The question remained whether they were ready to pay. The master conducting the ceremony was amazed at how many people they managed to gather for the auction. Overall, there was nothing unusual or surprising here. Heavenly demon weapons have always been of interest to members of the sacred cult. The auction began with the quadrangular halberd of the heavenly demon. The very first slot was already amazing. The great tactician brought in weapons that were put up for auction. Its starting price was 1,000 silver. The merchants instantly opened their mouths. Apparently this price was a complete shock to them. So far everything is according to plan. Our hero's face remained satisfied. It turned out that this price does not bother the cult representatives at all, and they are ready to pay much more. Now the price has already reached 100,000 silver. A gray-haired man in a pink kimono immediately outbid this bid, setting his own in the amount of 102,000 silver. The bidding was in full swing. However, not everyone was happy, or at least that's what it seemed like. However, the most important thing is that our hero liked everything. He grew rich right before his eyes. As a result, the halberd was sold for 102,000 to a representative from the Mahan family, for which he was congratulated. Even though it was already late at night, the trading was not going to stop and no one was going to go anywhere. The box opened. Apparently one of the slots for sale was in it, and although it was not large in size, its value was great. This was the last artifact. In their hand they held a bracelet, which was left as an inheritance by the first heavenly dragon. The auction participants were explained that this bracelet was the most important and most expensive item that they presented today. The auction participants froze in amazement as they looked at this small but incredibly valuable item. All that remains is to say its price. It was huge, so it wasn't easy to even say it. The starting price of this bracelet is 500,000 silver. The master of tactics managed to pronounce this price without changing his face at all. The stronger the contrast turned out to be with the guests, who did not expect that any items would be presented at this price. Our hero counted in his mind how much he managed to earn today. Judging by his smile, it was a colossal amount. The guests began to discuss whether such a thing was worth the gigantic amount of money that they were asking for it. Suddenly, someone raised his hand, saying only 2 words. Those words were 5 million. Although it turned out that they couldn't be more surprised, such a high bid for the bracelet plunged the guests into a real shock. Even our hero did not expect that there would be a person who would be ready to outbid the bet 10 times. The man who wanted to take possession of the bracelet for such huge money was the second student. The tactician looked at the young master in amazement. I don't understand how you can pay such a huge amount of money for just a bracelet. Guests were asked if there were any other suggestions for the price of this item. Of course, the guests had nothing to answer. So the slot was sold. 5 million for the divine demon bracelet that went to the young master. Dal decided to applaud the generous gesture on the part of the young warrior. You don't see events like this every day in your life. Our hero did not understand why he spent so much money on a simple relic, because it was not even a weapon. The tactician bowed his head and carried the bracelet to its new owner. The whole ceremony looked very solemn. The second young master immediately put his new acquisition on his hand, when suddenly something strange began to happen. The bracelet glowed with red flame. A second later, a sword appeared out of nowhere in the young warrior's hand, apparently turning from a bracelet. The sword began to appear right in his hand, forming from the energy trapped in the bracelet. Judging by the expression on the young warrior's face, he himself did not expect that the bracelet had such magical power. The whole hall looked at him with bated breath. It had already completely transformed and was in his hand. Then the hero finally realized that this was an unusual bracelet. He couldn't believe that he had missed such an important moment. The second student said that he wanted to buy the bracelet because he just liked it. He himself did not expect that he would turn into a ball. Judging by the way the sword was made, it was incredibly ancient. The copper began to transform into a bracelet again, apparently simply by the will of its new owner. The young student expressed the idea that he was not worthy of this sword. Perhaps he was hinting that he was ready to give it back. Nevertheless, our hero refused, arguing that feminine things could recognize their owners. It didn't take much convincing. The second master most likely did not seriously offer to return it and would happily keep it for herself. The entire hall chanted hooray for the second young master, although only our hero should have been congratulated today. This moment greatly strained our hero. He began to suspect that the young student had planned all the moves of his visit in advance. It dawned on him that they had entered into a game with him. This means it was necessary to act even more decisively. We return again to the rock on which the main character of the story was recently located. Warriors in round headdresses examined the rock, trying to find some signs of people being here. Judging by the tracks near the cave, they succeeded. The leader of the detachment ordered a notification to be sent immediately, as someone had left his solitude. It was necessary to immediately warn the main group. His order was immediately carried out. We returned to the monastery of our hero's clan. 3 of its main representatives, not counting the head himself, were sitting at the table. A rumor has spread that the second young master is the true heir of the heavenly demon. The fact that such rumors existed saddened its participants. The great tactician asked for forgiveness and promised to pay more attention to this. Apparently, He was responsible for the dissemination of information in the clan. Someone's foot opened the door. Only the leader should have had the impudence to do such an act. He carried approximately 1,000 books in his arms, but it was absolutely unclear why he was doing this. They immediately asked him what it was and why he brought it. At the same time, he decided to ask how he was feeling due to the loss of the bracelet, which turned out to be an incredibly valuable sword. He had to pretend that there was no reason to worry about this bracelet, although if he had known in advance its importance, he would have sold it at least 3 times more expensive. They were surprised by his words because they didn't think that he was ready to sell the bracelet in any case. Our hero explained that the bracelet reacts to the user's chi and is only activated if the chi level is at the level of the second young master or higher. So even if he kept it for himself, he simply would not have enough energy to use this sword. Nevertheless, our hero was saddened. He already didn't understand how to fight the most powerful representatives of his story, so now he also strengthened one of them with the help of this sword. The enemy in the form of the second young master instilled fear in him. Although his appearance was not dangerous, everyone understood perfectly how deadly this warrior was. And then he drew attention to the scroll that lay nearby, tied up, which means it had not yet been opened. It was an urgent letter from a group of traitors. Our hero instantly opened it and read it. Judging by his face, the information there was extremely unexpected. The scroll said that a certain man came out of the cave. He realized that we were talking about the main character Muk Van, who was supposed to come out after 2 years of training. Now it was completely unclear how to stay alive in this dangerous universe he had created. Night. There is nothing in the clear sky except the huge moon. Our hero's house. Hyuk Ryung-wung looked in the mirror and was alert, beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. In the reflection, he saw the same Lee Si-woon from real life. He asked our hero to come to his senses and realized that he was not Hyuk Ryung-un. With a serious look, the guy said that such a third-rate romance could definitely change. Meanwhile, 2 robbers were running away through the night clearing, cold sweat running down their backs from fear. Looking around, the men asked each other who this guy was who was chasing them. Serious Tae-moo Kwan caught up with his opponents and did not take his eyes off them. 2 hours ago, the bandits pointed their fingers at someone and laughed, calling the girl who was lying down a doll. The girl lay unconscious. The robber added that the girl was probably a master, because it took a good sleeping pill to put her to sleep. A voice came from behind the men and they were asked what they were doing there. This voice was Tae-moo Kwan, who smiled and said that the bandits are not doing anything good. The evil robbers began to shout at the guy and wave their weapons, shouting for the guy to go his way. Tae-moo Kwan was bored. He sat and looked at the running bandits, asking why all the bandits said and did the same thing. The guy stood up and began to take his sword out of its sheath, adding that apparently they were all taught this way at school. Taking out his sword, the guy made a quick and lightning strike with his sword at the enemies. From such a strong blow, the guy's opponent's weapons broke. The robbers were caught, not understanding what was happening. They were sitting on the ground holding fragments of their weapons. One of the stunned men asked why this guy was so strong. A smiling Tae-moo Kwan approached the robbers and asked how he could wake up the girl. One of the men looked first at the guy and then at his ally and did not know what to do. The second also looked at his ally and thus their eyes crossed. One of the bandits threw some balls and sent a guy who wondered. As soon as the balls landed at the guy's feet, they immediately broke and the reaction began. Soon, thick purple smoke formed in front of Tae-moo Kwan, in which something was clearly mixed. The bandit who threw the smoke bomb said that with this poison you can kill a bull in one blow and began to smile. However, he didn't smile for long, and soon after his proud smile he saw something he couldn't believe. Tae-moo Kwan stood in a huge smokescreen of poison and sniffed all this poison. The guy walked through the poison, waving his hand in front of his face to dispel the poison at least a little. He asked if they had added pepper to it. Realizing that this was a master and no poison had any effect on him, the robbers were very frightened. They trembled, and one, turning to his partner as Henim, said that they had to run away. Throwing down their weapons and shouting that they had strength, the men began to very quickly run away from the guy. Thus, they had been running for about 1 hour without stopping. The men were running out of strength, and the guy was full of strength. Tae-moo Kwan, who was serious and almost caught up with his enemies, did not slow down. When the guy almost caught up with them, the enemies turned around and asked him to spare them. Tae-moo Kwan took out his sword and rushed forward and began to swing it in the air. Having almost caught up with his opponents, the guy was ready and held his sword out a little. There was a blow. The guy started to break sharply because of such a high speed it was not very comfortable. The 2 bodies of the robbers fell to the ground, and Tae-moo Kwan himself stood in front of them and held his sword out of its sheath. Turning around, the guy said that his enemies didn't need to make him angry as long as he was kind. Tae-moo Kwan rummaged through the men's pockets, saying that they definitely had something to wake up the girl, and then he returned and poured something into the mouth of the girl, who was passed out. From afar, the voice of Moo Kwan's friends was heard who could not find him, and the guy himself was sitting on the ground with the girl's head on his knees. Having found his comrade, Gongsun-san asked why Tai Mu Quan disappeared so suddenly. The man continued, saying that he knew about his comrade's fighting skills, but added that he had poor direction, and also asked who the girl was on his lap. The girl began to come to her senses, and then the guy asked if everything was okay with her, and also added that there were a lot of bad guys in Murim, and asked the girl to be careful. The girl came to her senses, opened her eyes, and looked at Tai Mu Kwang. She said that she was indebted to the guy. Confused, Gongsun-san asked the girl if the divine moon goddess was there. Entering the conversation, Tai Mu Kwana inquired about the topic of this divine moon goddess. Gongsun-san said that she is the one who teaches the Jianghu villains a lesson, and the guy looked at the girl and smiled. She said that they were exaggerating. Taking her sword more tightly, the girl made a dash, and while running said that she needed to go, and also apologized. Tai Mu Quan made the same lightning-fast dash and caught up with the girl. She was very surprised by the guy's movement. On the fly, the main character of the novel introduced himself and invited the girl to meet. The girl stopped and introduced herself as Sil Su-yeon, and also wondered in her head who this guy was. This girl was the main character of the novel. Tai Mu Quan and Sil Su-yeon stood and looked at each other. The guy addressed the girl as a lady of the forces and offered to have dinner together since their meeting could be considered fate. The girl agreed. Meanwhile, the red banner of black lions was visible high in the sky, and birds were flying in the sky. It was a troop of black lions under the command of Sabu Seong, a troop of warriors dressed in black robes. Many bloody corpses lay on the ground in front of them. Sabu Seong, sitting down on a stone to rest, asked the warriors to inform the leader of the squad that he would finish off the remaining members of the Red Scorpion squad before returning. Bowing, the warrior said that he would convey everything word for word to the leader of the detachment from Sabu Seong. A detachment of black dragons sat down on their horses and began to ride forward somewhere. Meanwhile, the next day, a cloudy sky in which the blue sky itself could barely be seen. Hyok Ryong-un walked with his comrade Sangwan-hu and reasoned that Sabu Seong was very prudent, finishing off the remaining ones, and added that soon the entire western zone would be free. Sangwan-hu added that this would be their first achievement after joining the central headquarters of the sacred cult. Our hero thought that he did not have much hope for the Murim Special Forces, but they exceeded his expectations, and thanks to them, he has a greater chance of survival. A man approached our hero and his comrade and said that a letter had arrived for the leader of the squad, Hyok Ryong-un. What was there? Approaching the man, Hyok Ryong-un knelt down on one knee and extended both hands forward. The man who held the letter in his hands was dressed in expensive clothes and was also quite old. Our hero, taking the letter, said that he accepted it from the man with gratitude. But in his head, the guy thought that he was tired and was not allowed to rest. The guy picked up the scroll and began to read the letter that was written in it. While reading, our hero pulled an ear-to-ear smile and said that they were waiting for him at the castle tomorrow. Who could be waiting for our hero there? Night. From behind the clouds, the outlines of a huge moon could be seen, which stood above our hero's house. Hyuk Ryong-un sat at the table and held his head while looking at various papers on the table. He thought about why he was so suddenly called to the castle. He also added that the one who called him to the castle cannot know that Hyuk Ryong-un became possessed. The guy began to remember that about a year after the Heavenly Demon Festival, the devilish cult would go to war with the Murim Alliance, and our hero should die around that time. And also taking a book called Secret Weapons Survival Plan. He said that he needed to return home before that moment. Taking a brush with ink, the guy began to write something in an open book that was lying on his table. Continuing to write, our hero said that he had to come up with something to get out of this world. Night. A huge 5-story building above with a huge moon shining brightly. Inside there was a huge throne on which a man sat, and next to his throne stood 3 servants on each side. 3 brothers and a sister stood in front of the throne. Hyuk Ryong-jin and Hyuk Ryong-geum glanced at the man on the throne. On the other hand, Hyuk Ryong-wol and Hyuk Ryong-un also stood and looked at the man on the throne. The man sat proudly and looked down on everyone who was in this building. Our hero looked at him and admired him, thinking that this was the strongest among the leaders of the sacred cult, Hyuk Ryong-moon. A male servant shouted for them to salute the guardians of the sacred flame. Hyuk Ryong-geum began to bow and tell the others to salute the ruler of the sacred flame, the leader of their entire sacred cult. When everyone bowed down, the guy added that the ruler is the most noble creature to rule all living things. Hyuk Ryong-moon waved his hand and said to Hyuk Ryong-geum, "That's enough," and asked him to raise their heads. Smiling, Hyuk Ryong-moon told everyone to come and have tea, and also added that there is no need for such formalities between fathers and children. Our hero thought in surprise and said that this was not what he expected from the leader. The father and children were sitting in a huge room at the table, each with a cup of tea. While taking off his clothes, Hyuk Ryong-moon sighed and said that he was alive because he had already said how difficult it was for him to put on this sacred flame robe. Having taken off his clothes, the father appeared in front of all the children and asked how they were doing. He also pointed his hand at our hero and addressed him. Hyuk Ryong-un choked on his tea in surprise. The father asked the guy to show him something, but the guy with a surprised face did not understand what the man wanted. It turns out that Hyuk Ryong-moon called our hero to show him the Sky Demon sword because he wanted to see it. The guy, looking at his father with his mouth open, understood everything, but he was a little upset about it. Our hero took out a sword and then handed it to his father in both hands, who slowly raised his hand to the sword. The father took the sword, took it out of its sheath, and thought that this was the sword of the heavenly demon. Hyuk Ryong-moon made a serious expression on his face and then took a fighting stance. The man tensed and swung the sword he was holding in his hands, and the wind rose around him. Hyuk Ryong-geum was very surprised. He was sweating from the back of his head, but Hyuk Ryong-jin remained calm and continued to drink tea. Our hero raised his hand, slightly covering his face from such a strong wind, and was surprised. Holding the sword in his hands, the father said that he understood everything, and held out the sword in front of him. Closing his eyes, the man said that it was most likely not easy for his son to get this sword and praised him. The surprised guy did not understand what was happening. He had goosebumps all over his body from excitement. Hyuk Ryong-moon handed the sword to Hyuk Ryong-un and asked him to take care of the sword because it was very good. When the father held the sword in his hands, our hero thought that the sword was talking and tried to talk to him mentally. After talking with our hero, Hyuk Ryong-jin stood up and handed the bracelet to his father. He bought this bracelet at an auction from his brother and asked his father to look at it. The man said that he remembered that there was also a bracelet and took it from his son's hands. Having put on the bracelet, the man tensed up, and there was so much energy emanating around him that his hair was standing up. All the children looked in surprise. The youngest son and daughter stared at their father and bulged their eyes. The second son, being wary and serious, watched what was happening around his father. As a result, all the energy suddenly disappeared, and Hyuk Ryong-jin said that apparently the bracelet did not work, and added that only the owner can control it. Hyuk Ryong-jin said that he asked other people to try to activate it and they didn't succeed either, and then he took the bracelet from his father. Hyuk Ryong-wol sat back and asked her father why he had gathered them all in this place. Hyuk Ryong-moon sat down and cleared his throat as he began his speech about how the Heavenly Demon Festival was soon approaching. And also, looking at his son, he said that in addition there is a demon heir, and therefore he wants to increase the scale and offered to introduce incredible talents from their family into it. Hyuk Ryong-geum opened his mouth in surprise and shouted, asking what his father meant, and also asked if he wanted to invite other talents from other families. Hyuk Ryong-moon made a menacing, serious face and clenched his fists and asked what was wrong with his son, and also added that they do not have a monarchy and anyone in their cult can become a leader. The eldest son was a little upset by this and, dejected, lowered his head to the floor. Our hero raised his hand and turned to his father, saying that he had a proposal. The man began to listen to his son. Hyuk Ryong-un said he would like to invite families from outside the Central Plains to attend the festival. At that moment, the sister was very surprised and turned her head towards her younger brother. Also, the eldest brother was surprised by such a statement and began to follow his younger brother. The father chuckled, smiled, and asked why his son wanted to do this. Our hero said that even though they suppress their powers, they still don't know when they might be betrayed. And in this way, they will show their loyalty to the cult and prove that they are real. The father thought seriously and then smiled and turned his gaze, which covered all the children. Hyuk Ryong-moon said that he liked Hyuk Ryong-won's proposal and asked what everyone else thought about it. Both the daughter and the eldest brother began to look at the floor and turn away from their father. Hyuk Ryong-jin said that this is a good idea. This way they will show authority and generosity. The father hit the table and said that at this point, they had decided everything and began to get up. Rising from the table, Hyuk Ryong-moon raised his fist and, smiling, shouted that they managed to turn an unnecessary formality into an excellent opportunity, and he liked everything. The man wished his children good luck, and also reminded that the festival is very soon. The children went out into the street. Hyuk Ryong-jin paused and looked at his little brother walking with his sister. The first and second young masters looked at the third and fourth, saying that this festival would most likely be fun. Hyuk Ryong-jin wished good luck to his younger brother and sister and continued to go about his business, while our hero and his sister stood still. Hyuk Ryong-wol asked our hero if he knew that they would have to return the warriors from the border. The guy looked at his sister and told her not to worry, and that he had a great plan. The guy understood that even though the situation had changed since the moment he left the dungeon, the cult leader would change the scale. Meanwhile, a month before the festival, it's a warm day outside and a carriage is driving along the road. As they passed by each person, everyone shouted that this was the carriage of the king of the border, the king of the desert. Hyuk Ryong-wol was sitting in the carriage and thought that hundreds of years ago there were many tribes here, and now we are talking about some kind of king. Our hero, who was traveling with her, added that in the Kutsha region of the desert, there used to be a thriving civilization called the Kutsha Kingdom. The guy added that nothing prevents the kingdom from returning to its former glory, and the girl herself decided to ask if the Asana tribe lives in this place. Hyuk Ryong-un said that it is so. The Asan tribe has accumulated wealth and power in this place for many years, and now there are more than 36 desert tribes, their allies. The guy thought that initially, after the Heavenly Demon Festival, a king appears from the Asana tribe and becomes a strong assistant to the second master in the future. And also the guy added that he needs to recruit a talent who will be the first to become the king of the border and plan a future with him. And the girl added that this is possible Asmet. Since we were talking about a guy from the Asana tribe, whose name was Asmet, he was a tall young man with long hair. The guy smiled, and the girl added that Asmet is considered the wolf of the desert. They were clearly up to something. There was also a beautiful girl who covers her face with a special scarf. She has long dark hair and a black and yellow suit. Hyuk Ryong-woon was a little doubtful and said that he was not sure. What was he unsure about? 1 week before the Heavenly Demon Festival. It was a clear sunny day, and a crowd of people stood near a huge building. Hyuk Ryong-jin greeted everyone as the crowd around him grew larger and larger. Hyuk Ryong-un stood in the same place as the others, and thought that wherever Hyuk Ryong-jin went, he always gathered a lot of people around him, and it would be difficult to greet him. Suddenly, a mysterious person came out into this small square, and everyone suddenly began to look at this person. The people were very surprised to see this man before the Heavenly Demon Festival. He was a man with blonde long hair, wearing a bluish cloak and good physical fitness. Hyuk Ryong-moon himself came out to meet this man. Perhaps he was a very cool person. A tall man with blonde hair stopped in front of Hyuk Ryong-moon and saluted him. The man bowed and said that for the good of the relationship between the Asana clan and the divine cult, he, the Blue Wolf, Asmet wishes to take part in the festival at their invitation. One of the subordinates brought a tray with glasses of some kind of drink on it. Raising his glass, Hyuk Ryong-moon greeted the guest and told him to position himself in the cult as it was convenient for him. Asmet also raised his glass, brought it to his mouth, and then silently nodded his head. Hyuk Ryong-moon and the Blue Wolf from the Asana clan stood in front of a crowd of people and drank the contents of their glasses. Watching this, Hyuk Ryong-wol, standing next to her younger brother, said that it is not difficult for the guy to find a common language. Hyuk Ryong-un remained silent. Hyuk Ryong-wol asked Hyuk Ryong-woon how he was trying to convince Asmet, but at that moment our hero was no longer next to his sister, and she began to look around and did not understand where Un had gone. Meanwhile, Hyuk Ryong-un was already standing behind Asmet with a jug of booze and called out to him. Throwing away the bottle, our hero said that he had heard about the fighting skills of the Blue Wolf, and then offered to fight. Turning his attention to the young man, the Blue Wolf of the Asana clan began to turn towards the guy. Asmet said that he came as a guest and suggested that the fight be postponed until another time. Having drunk, Hyuk Ryong-un took out his sword and began to say that Asmet was cowardly, and also added that Asmet was not a wolf, but a dog. Seeing all this, Hyuk Ryong-wol stood with her mouth open in surprise and did not understand what her younger brother was doing. Asmet became more serious after our hero's provocation. He made a serious look and shouted at him to shut his mouth while he was being kind. Taking his stance and taking his sword, Hyuk Ryong-un, approaching Asmet, asked if he thought that he would be afraid of this. Our hero began to fly headlong towards his opponent and encouraged him to play with him a little. Asmet was very angry at this prank of our hero, and looking at the guy, began to take out his sword. The two swords collided, and the Blue Wolf from the Asana clan parried the blow of his opponent, who was Hyuk Ryong-un. The guy was surprised by the strength of his opponent, and looked into his eyes with surprised eyes. Asmet was very serious, and therefore he did not say anything and simply watched his opponent. Two guys stood opposite each other, Hyuk Ryong-un against the Blue Wolf of the Asan clan Asmet. Having said that all this is cool, our hero made a dash and began to quickly run towards his opponent. Seeing this, Asmet ran towards the young man in response, and Hyuk Ryong-un himself said that this is exactly what he was talking about. Asmet and our hero almost clashed with swords, when suddenly Hyuk Ryong-jin appears between them, stopping each of the combatants with both hands. Our hero became excited and was surprised that his older brother was already in this place. And at that very second, our hero flies away from the second young master and falls to the ground. Waving his hand at his younger brother, Hyuk Ryong-jin asked the servants to take his brother away from the square. The drunk fourth young master, who was being held by the servants, started screaming to be released immediately before he kicked Asmet's ass. Hyuk Ryong-jin bowed to the Blue Wolf and said that he apologizes for such disrespect from his younger brother. He did it in a fit of emotion. Asmet said that he understands that the guy could have gotten drunk at the banquet. The sister looked at this whole spectacle with surprised eyes, and did not understand what her younger brother had come up with this time. Meanwhile, in nature, the sky is cloudy. The rays of the sun are emerging from behind the clouds. Our hero said that he drank a little and rashly got into a fight. Our hero, walking through the clearing, thought about his behavior and thought through his further actions. The guy approached a small gazebo in which a woman was standing. The guy said that it was her. In the gazebo stood a girl named Asana Sara. She had a black robe and a hood. When the guy came closer to the girl, she asked if our hero was the fourth young master. The girl began to tell that this is the youngest son of the cult leader, known for his bad behavior. But after completing the dungeon, he became the heir of the heavenly demon. After that, she added that judging by the guy's actions, she had nothing to talk to her about and began to leave. The guy shouted after him that it was difficult for Asmet to become the king of the desert. The guy added to the back of the leaving girl that he knew that Lady Sarah was also worried about this. The girl looked at our hero and said that she didn't understand why he cared about her worries and what he was leading to. The guy said that Asmet is an unsurpassed fighter. He fights for justice, is brave, and nothing can stop him. Continuing, our hero said that these are all the characteristics of a warrior, and being a king is completely different. Putting on a serious face, Hyuk Ryong-un said that if Asmet was a king, then his little provocation would not have caused Asmet to draw his sword. The girl was very surprised and thought about the words of the fourth young master. And the guy continued that Asana Sara, not Asmet, deserves the throne of the desert. He also added that Asmet simply outshines her with his fame, and only thanks to the girl, the clan became powerful. The girl was stunned. She, worried, asked what the young man was talking about and did not understand how she could take the throne herself. Hyuk Ryong-un put on a serious face and said that he, the son of the leader of the divine cult and one of the official members of the Rahu clan, would help the girl become the queen of the desert. Meanwhile, in some town, which was surrounded by a wall from the outside, screams were heard on one of the streets. There was a man standing on the street holding a child and ordering Sil Su-young and Tae-mu Kwang not to come closer. The man held the sword near the child and shouted that if they came one step closer, he would cut the boy's throat. The boy roared loudly. Tae-mu Kwang asked why the man didn't just give in and let the child go. He kept coming. The man shouted that the young man should not try to come closer, otherwise he would actually kill the boy. Tae-mu Kwang took out a coin and held his palm with this small coin behind his back so that the man in front would not notice. With a sharp movement of his hand, the guy threw a coin at his opponent. It flew quickly and accurately like a bullet. The guy hit the target, and the man screamed in pain and released the little boy from his hands. At that same second, Sil Su-yeon made a lightning-fast dash and rushed towards the man. Running up to the child, she quickly grabbed it. Everyone around was surprised, even the boy himself. The girl at the same speed began to run away from the man who was wounded by Tae-mu Kwang and take the child with her. Tae-mu Kwang stood in front of the man who held his hand and said that now they will return to the Muram Alliance and talk about who this man is. The man's eyes were pink, an ominous aura emanated from him, and the man himself growled angrily and bared his teeth. The man began to undress, and some bubbles began to inflate all over his body. He said that they would not get rid of him like that. Tae-mu Kwang looked at this man and was dumbfounded. He had never seen anything like this and did not understand what was happening. The blisters on the man's body swelled even stronger, and then he shouted in praise of the cult of the sun and moon. Tae-mu Kwang took out his sword and immediately shouted for the Sil lady to quickly take cover with the child. The girl and boy were stunned. They looked at what was happening in surprise, with their mouths open. The man simply exploded, and the shockwave was very strong. Protecting himself from the shockwave, Tae-mu Kwang put up some kind of barrier with his hand. A small hole formed at the site of the explosion, and there was pinkish dust in the air. The girl and the child approached Tae-mu Kwang and silently looked at the scene of the explosion. The guy also watched the explosion site nearby and began to get very angry. The enraged Tae-mu Kwang was very angry at the damned demonic cultists. Meanwhile, the evening before the festival day, there were huge banquet tables on the street, and servants walked around and served a wide variety of delicious dishes. Our hero and his guy stood in this square where there were tables and watched. Jang Murian said that among the guests will be the young master himself, the heir of the heavenly demon, and this feast is for him. The guy scratched his head and said that after the fight he caused at the banquet, he became good for nothing again. The old man looking at him told him not to worry and everything would go fine. Our hero thought about it and said that he overdid it with his plans, but he achieved everything he wanted. Thinking further, he said that his image of Hyuk Ryong-un is not as important as the image of the king of the border. Plus, the second young master will relax after his trick. A servant approached Hyuk Ryong-un and said that a guest had come to him. The guy turned around and asked who. At that moment, the guy was very surprised because he saw someone he knew. Who was it? There stood the same Asana Sara, who covered her face with a scarf and turned to the young master Hyuk Ryong-un. The girl took off her scarf and asked how our hero was doing. Hyuk Ryong-un stood with his comrades in front of the girl, and there was a short pause. Hyuk Ryong-un's comrades began to feel embarrassed and said that Asana Sara was a very beautiful and sweet girl. The girl approached our hero and said that she had come to ask how the guy was going to defeat the second young master in the test, and the guy understood that he was an unusual person and would immediately get down to business. Asana Sara said that in order to form an alliance with our hero, she needs confidence that his plan will definitely help defeat the second young master. The self-confident guy smiled and said that of course his plan would work perfectly. The young man's subordinate brought the chest and opened it in front of the girl's face. Hyuk Ryung-un said that this was his plan, but the girl did not understand anything and was in shock. Our hero made a serious face, smiled, and said that this would help him win. It was the morning of the Heavenly Demon Festival, and the test site was a huge mountain. Our hero took off his blindfold, checking his equipment. Hyuk Ryung-un checked everything and said that everything was fine. The guy thought that, as in the novel, they went to the mountains east of the Red Mountain. The young man said that he knew how everything would go, and therefore began to prepare long before the festival itself. Imagining in his head all the stages of preparation that he had done, the guy said that he would not have to compete with him. The young man smiled, made a serious face, and said that he just needed to collect more tokens, and then he would win. The young master's equipment was lying on the ground. He was asked if he was sure that it would work, and also asked how his conversation with Hyuk Ryung-wol went. Putting on a bulletproof vest, the guy said that his sister would figure everything out, and they just needed to believe in the young master. Sa Bu-seong said that Hyuk Ryung-won was able to pass the tests in the Heavenly Demon Dungeon, and he prepared a lot for all this, so there is no reason not to believe in him. The young man took some kind of box and shook it near his ear. He said that it would be useful to him to walk somewhere, and he called Sa Bu-seong behind him, saying that it was time for them to move out. Our hero and his fellow archer went to the first location. Night. Test location, 3 days before the test. It was some kind of forest in a mountainous area. In the forest, there was a frightened man who fell and looked at someone while shouting and turning to the second young master. In front of him was the second young master with his squad. They were looking intently at the man. Hyuk Ryung-jin smiled and asked the man where his tokens were. The frightened man handed a handful of tokens to the second young master and said, "Here they are." Placing his hand on the man's shoulder, Hyuk Ryung-jin said that there was no need to be so afraid, and also added that if the man did not interfere, then he would be under his protection until the end of the test. The frightened man asked this again to make sure that he had heard everything correctly, and Hyuk Ryung-jin himself said that it was true, and they were members of a divine cult. Hyuk Ryung-jin stood up and extended his hand, and also added that there was no need for them to shed each other's blood. Meanwhile, Hyuk Ryung-wol and someone were running through the forest, and her companion asked her to hurry up. The girl wondered if this was exactly what her younger brother had warned her about. She remembered Hyuk Ryung-won's words when he said that there would probably be a survival test where they would have to steal each other's tokens in order to win. The guy continued by saying that most of the participants do not know about the dangers of the mountainous terrain, and therefore they should bring a guide who is good in the surrounding area and not in martial arts. Remembering her brother's words when he said that if they were separated before starting, then she should flee to the north, the sister thought that she had made a mistake in bringing the master from the Chanyu clan. The girl was expecting a test in the form of a fight without rules, like 30 years ago. But now she was in a hurry and understood that she needed to move north as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, one of the detachments has already located its base on some good piece of land. This was the territory of the first and second young masters, who were sitting inside at the table. They had a box on the table containing tokens, and the elder brother himself said that there were exactly 46 of them. Hyuk Ryung-jin wondered that his younger brother and sister had not arrived yet. Hyuk Ryung-gyum said that there was no point in worrying about them because Woong was very lucky to escape from the Sky Demon Dungeon and has no talent or fame. Hyuk Ryung-jin became even more lost in his thoughts, and thought that it was difficult to say that his brother, the first person who managed to pass the dungeons of the Heavenly Demon, was simply lucky. The second young master continued to speculate that Hyuk Ryung-un had definitely prepared something. Hyuk Ryung-geum said that everyone saw how their younger brother got drunk and got into a fight, and therefore he did not change. Some loud noises began to be heard on the street, and the brothers themselves looked out to see what was happening outside. There were 6 bodies hanging from the trees, and the guards were shouting for their lords to look at it for themselves. These were the carcasses of rabbits, which were killed quite brutally. Each carcass was hung by one paw. Hyuk Ryung-geum got angry and called all his subordinates idiots, swung his sword and cut the rope with the animals. The carcasses fell to the ground, and the first young master himself asked why they were so scared of ordinary rabbit carcasses. The guy yelled at his subjects and said that they now have free food and there is no reason to whine. They, in turn, apologized. While the elder brother was commanding everyone, Hyuk Ryung-jin looked at the carcasses of the rabbits and thought that they had managed to hang them without his knowledge. The guy was very angry and surprised at the same time, and also began to think that perhaps this was some kind of warning. The night has passed. Hyuk Ryung-un, along with Sa Bu-seong, looked out from behind the trees and watched Hyuk Ryung-jin's camp. Sa Bu-seong asked if the hanging animal trick would definitely work on them. Our hero looked at his comrade in arms and said that the rabbits would not be left unattended. According to the novel, Hyuk Ryung-jin will use the test as an opportunity to gain the trust of the cult. In his head, the young man continued that this is why he works with people unsuitable for the task, even at the cost of mobility, and this sounds like a good opportunity. The night before, on the tree hung the bloody carcass of a raccoon, which was suspended from a branch by its paw. He was knocked down and the body of the animal quickly fell down. Someone approached the carcass. It was Hyuk Ryung-jin and Hyuk Ryung-geum. They were looking at the body of this raccoon, and the second master was thinking about what would happen next. Hyuk Ryung-jin, who was serious, put on a serious face and said that he would go look around. Hyuk Ryung-geum said that this is not necessary, and while they are there, people will bring them their tokens under threat of death. And if there is any concern, then they can send a detachment of hunters. At that moment, a fire broke out behind Hyuk Ryung-jin. The brothers did not understand what was happening. The second young master said that he would go and check what happened there and ran sharply towards the fire. When the guy arrived at the scene of the fire, he saw tents that someone had set on fire. There were no people there. Hyuk Ryung-jin thought that most likely the detachment that was located in this camp was attacked. The guy didn't understand why someone removed the bodies and started a fire, and then realized that it could all be a trap. At that moment, an arrow was already flying at the young man very accurately, right at the head. When the arrow almost reached his head and touched his temple, the second young master caught it with his hand in mid-flight and looked in the direction where the arrow came from. The man who shot at Hyuk Ryung-jin was in the bushes to his left. When the guy looked there, no one was visible. The second young master began to transform his bracelet into a sword, smoothly, controlling this process. When the sword was in the young man's hand, he waved it towards the trees and bushes from where they were shooting at him. Some kind of powerful blast wave flew there, which instantly destroyed a small section of the territory in this place. From a distance, the archer looked like Sabu Seung. He dodged Hyuk Ryung-jin's attack and began to jump away from the guy. Seeing him, the young master made a dash and jumped in pursuit of the archer who was trying to kill him. However, at that moment when the young man was in the air, he was shot from behind, and the arrow flew straight into his back. Having dodged an arrow in the air, the guy realized that there were more than one archers. Hyuk Ryung-jin landed on the ground and began to look around. He looked at the places where they shot at him. Gathering some powerful energy in his hands, the guy said that he was already starting to get angry. Time passed, and the battle ended. The settlement where the first young master and the second young master lived. Hyuk Ryung-jin went inside and asked his brother if anything happened while he was away. The older brother said that nothing happened and asked to tell what happened at the fire site. The young man began to say that it seemed to him that someone had attacked the camp, and so he went to check. But on the spot he was attacked by two archers. Hyuk Ryung-geum laughed and said that the idea of taking archers as assistants to this place is very stupid and he does not understand the motive of those who did it. Hyuk Ryung-jin said that he was very angry about the showdown with archers in battle, and his older brother told him to forget about it, because archers are only strong in reconnaissance and in real combat they are weak. The guy took an arrow with him. He began to examine it and say that it was a black arrow. It was made for an attack on the field. Whoever used it clearly prepared it for some kind of test. Hyuk Ryung-jin was very surprised and began to think that his youngest brother had set it all up. A servant came into the tent and said that the second young master must definitely see something. When Hyuk Ryung-jin turned around, he saw a man carrying an exhausted Hyuk Ryung-wol. Looking at his sister, the guy was very surprised to see her in such a pitiful state. He looked straight into her face. The girl raised her head and looked at Hyuk Ryung-jin. Her face was covered in bruises. She was beaten. The second young master asked his sister what happened and how it could all happen to get to this point. Falling exhausted, the girl said that this idiot Hyuk Ryung-un threw her, and the girl lost consciousness. The girl lost consciousness and fell right on top of her older brother, who was in shock and did not understand what had happened. After a while, Hyuk Ryung-jin approached one of the soldiers and asked how his sister was feeling. The man said that she was still feverish, and she herself continued to mumble about some kind of poison, and he also added that she should call a doctor and find out about the antidote. Hyuk Ryung-jin couldn't form a complete picture in his head. He didn't understand whether his brother could betray his sister. During a conversation between a guy and a man in the camp, loud screams began to be heard everywhere. They looked to the side. A soldier was running towards them, who had been poisoned and had huge blisters all over his body. The distraught and infected man ran after his former comrades and uttered loud screams, and they, in turn, ran away. There were more than one infected person like this one. Similar monsters began to appear throughout the camp. Hyuk Ryung-jin looked in surprise at this whole picture of what was happening and could not believe his eyes. At that moment, one of the soldiers approached the man with the young man, and the man punched the soldier as hard as he could. The infected fell to the ground and began to scream, pointing somewhere with his hand that there were monsters everywhere. Looking at everyone around him, the guy thought that the soldiers had the same symptoms as his sister Hyuk Ryung-wol, hallucinations and outright delirium, although it looked more like a fever rather than poison. But then the guy did not understand what kind of blisters were on the bodies of the infected. They were huge and pinkish in color. They were everywhere. The whole body was covered with them. Arms, legs, face, and body. The guy thought about it. It dawned on him, and he was completely dumbfounded. He thought it was mosquitoes. Meanwhile, a huge hail of fire arrows fell on the village. A whole shower of arrows flew towards Hyuk-ryong-jin. The arrows hit the target. They hit every tent and the tents began to catch fire. A couple of minutes before this incident, Hyuk-ryong-won stood with Sabu-seong and the box that he grabbed before the start. Our hero said that he returned to the cave of the heavenly demon and brought mosquito larvae. He was surprised how they grew. Sabu-sen asked if he would use this muck. Covering his head and face with a bandage, our hero smiled and said that all means were good, and therefore they needed to get down to business. Our heroes stood at sunset, well camouflaged and watching the entire settlement of Hyuk-ryong-jin. Having opened the box, from which a huge number of mosquitoes flew, the guy said that they could only wait for the chaos to begin. The first check of the heavenly demon dungeon, these mosquitoes flew into the camp in a whole flock, and no one could do anything. The camp came under a very strong attack. Several fire arrows stuck out in each tent, and people went crazy due to the poison. Hyuk-ryong-geum, watching this whole picture, shouted what was happening in this damn place. He ordered those who had not yet gone out of their way to quickly put out the fire. Hyuk-ryong-jin shared his thoughts and told his older brother that he thought it was all the doing of their youngest brother. The elder brother was surprised that everything could be behind this scoundrel, and also added that they needed to leave. They would spend too much time and effort on bringing the madmen back to normal. Hyuk-ryong-jin was extremely surprised and angry that not everything was going according to his plan. One of the servants ran up to the guys and told them to quickly pay attention to the central tent. Remembering, Hyuk-ryong-geum shouted that their fire tokens were in the tent, and everyone should immediately run there. Hyuk-ryong-jin thought about his sister. He whispered her name, and then loudly said that Hyuk-ryong-wol needed to sleep first. Surprised and furious, Hyuk-ryong-geum looked at his younger brother, who turned around and was even more furious. Hyuk-ryong-jin himself made a jerk and accelerated towards the tent where his sister lay. The older brother shouted at the younger brother's back that he was a complete idiot, and that they shouldn't do this and that they didn't need the girl. Hyuk-ryong-jin ran to the tent where his sister was lying and looked inside. He was surprised at what he saw. There was no one on the bed where Hyuk-ryong-wol was supposed to be lying. The guy was surprised that the girl ran away. The guy began to look around and see where they had gone and also smiled. The guy said that as he thought, Hyuk-ryong-won and Hyuk-ryong-wol are on the same side. Meanwhile, our hero and his comrades were sitting in their camp by the fire and holding in their hands the box that had just been stolen. Hyuk-ryong-un counted all the tokens from the box and said that there were 46 of them. The angry sister said that if our hero forced her to do something like that again, she would kill him. Our hero apologized to Hyuk-ryong-wol and said that this was the only way to distract their brother. Asana-sara said that all that was left was to hide the tokens until the test was over. Our hero objected to Asana and said that there would be more to come and now the second young master would not spare anyone. Hyuk-ryong-wol looked at her seriously and said that her younger brother was right, and Hyuk-ryong-jin would not just leave things like that. The guy closed the box with tokens and said that the most important times had come. The guy added that this time Princess Sarah will have to prove herself. The girl looked at the guy in surprise. Meanwhile, the entire camp in which the two older brothers were burned to the ground. Not a single living place remained from it. There was a guy sitting on a large rock, holding his head, and another guy was lying at his feet, also holding his head. Their heads were pounding. Hyuk-ryong-jin asked where Hyung-nim was. The man said that he went after the third young lady. The guy said that because of this, they lost valuable time and began to head somewhere. At dawn, the second young master said that there were still 2 days left, and they had time to make up for everything. Hyuk-ryong-jin addressed the man as Shujuyu, and told him to take care of everything while he himself went to get the tokens. The man bowed to the young master and said that he would do everything as he was ordered, and Hyuk-ryong-jin himself rushed to look for the tokens. Meanwhile, in some abandoned house in the middle of the forest, due to the dense foliage, even the sun barely reached this area. Hyuk-ryong-un was sitting inside the house with his squad. A fire was lit in the middle of the house, on which food was being cooked. Asana-sara asked the young master to explain the plan to her in more detail so that no one would make a mistake. Our hero said that in his opinion, the second young master will find this place very soon, but it will only be a deception for him to lose them. Hyuk-ryong-wol smiled and asked if her brother wanted to drag Hyuk-ryong-jin to this place, and added that it would be very difficult to do. The girl added that their older brother was very careful, and our hero grinned and said that his own caution would destroy his brother. Sabu-seong did not understand his commander's statements and asked for an explanation in simpler language. Hyuk-ryong-un lay down on his sleeping place and told the others to rest for now. The morning is wiser than the evening. Sabu-seong looked at our hero and didn't understand whether he really fell asleep so quickly. Hyuk-ryong-wol looked at her sleeping brother and didn't understand how she could sleep so peacefully, and she doesn't even know whether it's good or bad. Asana Sara said that she had never met a person with the same type of thinking as our hero, even in the desert. The girl thought that maybe a guy could help her dream come true. Our hero turned over on his side and began to make snoring sounds very loudly, so that everyone would think that he was fast asleep. The guy turned on his side and began to pretend that he was sleeping, while he thought that Sarah was weak in front of her brother, and he would play along, hoping that she was on his side. The guy sighed and said that it was all too hard and he didn't want to worry about anything. Meanwhile, Hyuk Ryung-jin had already found Hyuk Ryung-un's hideout and was watching him while sitting on a branch. The guy thought about the fact that Hyuk Ryung-un managed to set up a base here even before the start of the test. At this moment, Asana Sara comes out of the house, holding in her hands the very box where the previous owners kept the tokens. The girl, taking the box more comfortably, began to walk somewhere. Nothing could be read on her face. The second young master was very surprised to see Lady Sarah coming out of Hyuk Ryung-un's house. Asana Sara walked and thought in her head that she understood that the second young master was somewhere here, and so she pretended that she was alone. The guy understood that Asana Sara could not be alone in such a place, and most likely this was some kind of trick by Hyuk Ryung-un. The girl looked at the branch and turned to the young man. The girl said that she wants to make a deal. If he helps her, then the desert tribes will help him. The guy couldn't believe his eyes and ears. The master also added that as long as Asmet is there, she cannot do whatever she wants. Sarah said that if the young man did not believe her, then she could prove her words. And after that she poured all the tokens from the box onto the ground. And then she opened the door to the house and showed that everyone who was inside was sleeping, having been poisoned. The second young master looked at this picture and was surprised that the girl poisoned his sister and brother. Asana Sara said that she showed the guy all the evidence, but he did not move and assumed that he was stupid and that unreliable people were helping him. These words touched the guy, and at the same second the girl uttered the words, a strong roar was heard. Hyuk Ryung-jin jumped down from the tree and stood in front of Asana Sara. He was quite angry due to the recent events. Having calmed down, the guy asked if the girl could give command over an entire tribe. Asana Sara, looking into the eyes of the second young master, said that as soon as she becomes a queen and fell silent. Jin asked the girl that she wanted the young man, after winning the test, to help her become the ruler of the dynasty, and not as Metu. The girl, looking the young man in the face, said that initially, Hyuk Ryung-un was the first to offer such a deal, but she refused when she heard his plan. Asana Sara said that after she put this squad to sleep, she went in search of the second young master. Initially, they wanted to put him to sleep and keep him locked up until the end of the test. The girl added that now the sleeping pills had run out and everyone had been asleep for a long time, and also pointed at them with her hand. The girl smiled and said that she just needed someone's help, no matter the winner of the test or not, and the guy just suited her. Hyuk Ryung-jin said that this was a good choice and asked if he could ask her one question. With angry eyes, the guy in a rage asked if she had offered this deal to his brother. Asana Sara looked into the sky and saw something. She was very surprised and stood in a little shock. The girl realized that something was wrong here, and therefore began to jump away from the second young master to escape. She shouted and addressed Hyuk Ryung-gyum and also tried to dodge everyone who was there. Meanwhile, the warriors from Hyuk Ryung-gyum's detachment were already on the spot, and they jumped from the mountain to the ground. A fairly large detachment of soldiers, one by one, jumped off a small mountain and stood right in front of Hyuk Ryung-jin's face. Hyuk Ryung-gyum was the last to jump. He was already holding a sword in his hands, which was without a sheath. Hyuk Ryung-jin did not move. He stood and silently watched until the entire squad of his brother and himself gathered. In turn, Hyuk Ryung-gyum and his squad stood in front of the second young man. Hyuk Ryung-jin smiled and said that he was already wondering where his older brother could have gone. Hyuk Ryung-gyum said that his brother could not be defeated, and the future of the divine cult belonged to him. Pointing his sword at his older brother, Hyuk Ryung-jin made a serious look and told his brother to prove his words. Hyuk Ryung-gyum shouted for his minions to run to the attack, and the second young master took a stance and unsheathed his blade. Many opponents ran towards the guy at once. He got ready, swung his sword, and formed a huge shockwave in front of him. All the enemies who ran towards the young man began to be thrown back. The wave was so strong that the enemies even hovered in the air for some time. Each of them flew away in different directions. Some men flew away from the wave and screamed in pain. From behind his subjects, Hyuk Ryung-gyum himself prepared himself and made a strong push towards his younger brother. Running closer, the young man began to swing his arms, shouting at his brother. He was as furious as possible. Hyuk Ryung-jin also made a dash to quickly reach his brother. He was not going to yield to him for a second. Having approached each other, the first two young masters swung at each other, their swords almost touching. The strength of these young men was so great that due to an ordinary blow, a huge force wave formed around them. A huge cloud of dust arose, which could be compared to a smoke grenade. but no one was visible. When the dust settled a little, there was only one Hyuk Ryong Jin standing on the battlefield, and the rest seemed to have disappeared. Looking around, the second young master didn't understand where everyone who was here just now could have gone. The guy noticed an empty box that contained money, but there were no tokens there. The guy turned his sword back into a bracelet and said that he knew it all, and also smiled. Being angry, the guy's eyes glowed in the dark like two rubies. He said that he didn't think that everything would go far. The guy made a jerk and then jumped high into the air. He was very serious. Being in the air from the outside, the guy did not look like a person. He looked like someone had released some kind of demon to hunt. Hyuk Ryong Jin jumped from tree to tree. He was looking for his opponents to take revenge on them and return his tokens. Meanwhile, the frightened Hyuk Ryong Woong said that he knew that they could not cope with his brother one-on-one. And the angry Hyuk Ryong Wool said that our hero's plans would lead them to the grave. Our proud hero said that if not for his plan, they would not have been able to deceive Hyuk Ryong Jin. The girl thought, sweat dripping from her face with excitement. She understood that her younger brother was right. Asana Sara approached our hero and asked how he was feeling, because there was still a little poison in him. The guy said that everything was fine, and everything would have been bad if the antidote had not worked. The guy began to think about all the actions. He said that the second young master had betrayal of his elder brother on his mind, and it's good that the plan worked. Hyuk Ryong Woong said that they had little time and needed to move out as soon as possible. Night, a box with tokens lay on some small stone in the middle of the forest. Next to the box, on this huge stone, sat Hyuk Ryong Geum, who was barely trying to catch his breath. The elder brother understood that on this day, all he needed was to survive. He couldn't underestimate the second young master, as he was very strong and could catch them all in one night. From the darkness of the forest, they began to hear some footsteps. Someone slowly but confidently approached the place where the first young master was sitting. Hyuk Ryong Geum jumped up and screamed at the top of his lungs, asking who he was and what he needed. The silhouette of a guy began to appear from the darkness, and soon it turned out to be the evil Hyuk Ryong Jin, who was slowly walking towards his brother. The frightened Hyuk Ryong Geum did not understand. He was scared and wary. He asked how the young man was able to get to him so quickly. Hyuk Ryong Jin continued to approach his older brother and address him. The angry second young master said that he would give the first young master one last chance. Hyuk Ryong Geum was overwhelmed by such a powerful aura of his brother. His face was covered in sweat, and he himself was afraid. He did not know what to do. Little by little, the older brother began to kneel in front of his younger brother. He knelt down in front of Hyuk Ryong Jin and gave him the box containing the tokens, and also began to ask for forgiveness. Hyuk Ryong Jin took the box from his older brother and began to open it himself to check for the tokens. A strange smell began to come from the box, which also had some kind of pinkish tint. The even more angry young man threw the box away from him. Hyuk Ryong Geum did not understand what had happened. There were some kind of bombs in the box, and when you open it, they should explode, which is why Hyuk Ryong Jin smelled this strange smell. The surprised Hyuk Ryong Geum did not understand how it was, and therefore looked at the box in shock and asked his brother about it. Hyuk Ryong Jin was even more angry. He understood that this was all the work of his younger brother, Hyuk Ryong Un. Meanwhile, from the west, someone fired a flare. The second young master noticed it immediately and did not understand anything. He was stunned that the flare was from the west, and also wondered that Hyuk Ryong Un might already be in the camp. The guy went to the place from which the flare was fired. He was in a hurry. There were only two people at the place, Hyuk Ryong Un, who was holding some kind of bag in his hands, and one of Hyuk Ryong Jin's subordinates. The man turned to the second young master and said that Hyuk Ryong Un said that he would burn all the tokens if they did not call him. Meanwhile, the fourth young master was taking out a bunch of tokens from his small pouch. The guy took the fire saber and brought it to the tokens. Hyuk Ryong Jin thought that he decided not to hide until the end of the test, but simply called him. The guy was alone. As the source of fire moved even closer to the tokens, the man added that Hyuk Ryong Woon would set fire to all the tokens if Hyuk Ryong Jin came closer. Hyuk Ryong Jin asked his brother what he needed, and Hyuk Ryong Un himself said that, as he thought, the second young master is smarter than his older brother. Hyuk Ryong Jin thought about the fact that he saw a stupid hooligan in his younger brother, and did not expect that he would be able to pull it off like that. In vain, they underestimated him. Hyuk Ryong Woong stood up and said that he and his Hyung wanted to offer Hyuk Ryong Jin a deal. The second young master thought that if his younger brother just wanted to win, he would not have invited him to his place. Hyuk Ryong Woong said that he is sure that his older brother is worried about his sister Hyuk Ryong Wol. After these words, Hyuk Ryong Jin immediately became angry, and turning his bracelet into a sword, said that it was too early to count on his victory, and there was still time to kill his brother and find his sister. Hyuk Ryong Un was scared. He didn't show it to his opponent, but in his head he thought that he knew that it wouldn't be easy, and if he didn't stop, then goodbye to his little head. Our hero thought that in the novel Hyuk Ryong Jin the hero is quite straightforward. He is quiet and polite, But there is one thing. Hyuk Jin will not hesitate if anyone gets in his way. He is the master of the demonic sect. Our hero said that if Hyuk Jin kills him and takes the tokens, he will definitely win, however. Will the rest of the family support him after such actions? Hyuk Jin was dumbfounded. The only weakness of the second young master is that no one is behind his strength. Behind Hyuk Gyeum is the Bukchon clan. Behind Hyuk Wol is the Chanyu clan, which will always help her. And behind Hyuk Un, there is the Rahu clan, which, like the others, can help him. Hyuk Jin's mother was from a clan that was at enmity with the demonic sect, and she could not support her son. His only relative, Hyuk Ga, also could not support the guy being neutral. Hyuk Jin only has his own strength. No one will help him. Another problem was that after winning the test, the 6 clans did not recognize the second young master and began to try to kill him. And soon, according to the plot of the novel, Hyuk Jin, who was trying to defeat the 6 clans, decided to purge the members of the 6 clans. During this purge, the novel's protagonist, Tae-mu Kwang, infiltrated the divine sect to become a follower of the heavenly demon. Our hero understood that it was not easy for his older brother to shed blood, and he never wanted to do it. If only there was some way to negotiate with the 6 clans without shedding anyone's blood. Hyuk Jin would definitely choose this method so that no one gets hurt. Hyuk Jin thought about what his younger brother said about the 6 clans. The second young master became even more angry. A powerful red aura appeared around him, and Hyuk Un himself was shocked. Our hero looked at his older brother and did not understand what was happening. Dust was rising around him. The shocked Hyuk Un looked at the second young master and did not understand whether he had really changed and wanted to shed blood. Hyuk Jin was furious. Veins began to pop out on his face, and his hair rose into the air due to the powerful energy. Our hero, being frightened, said that if everything was exactly like that, then he had calculated everything incorrectly. Shaw, the hero, stood in this huge flow of energy and said that he took a big risk when he relied on the plot of the novel, and now everything is not going very well. Hyuk Jin calmed down and began the process of turning his sword back into a bracelet. The guy clenched his fist and exhaled heavily. From now on, the second young master was completely calm. Hyuk Un looked at him and did not understand what was happening to his older brother. Hyuk Jin looked back and addressed the subordinate as leader on and ordered him to go without him. The 2 brothers were left alone because Hyuk Jin's subordinate immediately left. The calm Hyuk Jin told his brother to tell him everything in more detail. Our hero was surprised that his young man controlled his rage so quickly, and nothing less was expected from the main villain. Hyuk Wung said that he wants to form an alliance with his older brother, Hyuk Jin. Hyuk Jin silently looked at his younger brother, and while he didn't really understand, he was thinking about the guy's words. Our hero added that then he would have the support of 100 sides of the Chanyu clan and the Rahu clan. Victory would be almost guaranteed with the support of 2 of the 6 clans. Hyuk Jin refused to believe it. He did not understand what his younger brother was trying to do. The second young master said that Hyuk Un had already secured the support of 2 clans, and why did Hyuk Jin need such help? Our hero shouted that he had no goal of becoming the heir to the divine cult. One mistake and everything would be in vain. The guy said that if he takes over the border, then Henim will receive a divine cult. The desert tribes are still opposed to their cult. If he dares to enter the central plains, they will be finished. Hyuk Jin asked his brother if he was ready to take responsibility for this difficult situation that happened. Our hero said that he was ready to take responsibility, and also added that, frankly, he did not care about the central plains. He said that on the border there are huge deserts, beyond which the western regions, even the sacred fires of the cult appeared from them. So if they can ensure the growth of the cult, then they need this border. Hyuk Jin listened carefully to his brother and thought about everything he said. He did not answer anything. Our hero got scared and wondered if he had said too much because he panicked and began to speak without thinking. He understood that the die had been cast and there was no turning back. The elder brother listened to our hero and turned to him. The 4th young master prepared to listen carefully to his brother. Hyuk Jin got angry and said that the guy's plan sounds reliable, but it doesn't sound sincere. The frightened Hyuk Un thought that he knew it. He cursed his playful tongue, with which he said too much. Putting on a serious face and also taking out his sword, Hyuk Jin said that if he had nothing to say, he would take the tokens. Our hero was scared. Drops of sweat were running down all over his face because he was very scared. The guy shouted, asking Hyuk Jin not to kill him. He shouted this with all his strength. After such a strong cry, the young man began to think, and his older brother looked at him and was a little puzzled. Our hero asked not to be killed, and he does not want to die. He added that even if he can now become the heir to the divine cult with the help of tokens, he is still dead. Jin looked at his younger brother and asked if he said that he had the support of 2 clans. Our hero said that with them he is strong, but he will not become as strong as his brother, and alone he is powerless. Hyuk Ryong-jin calmed down again. The sword became a bracelet. The guy said that these words sounded more convincing than those he said about the border. Our hero also said that he also wants a guarantee of the safety of him and Hyuk Ryong-wol, as well as high ranks. Hyuk Ryong-jin smiled and asked if his brother thought he could kill his siblings. Hyuk Ryong-un said that in the cult one might not encounter such things. The second young master agreed and asked if his younger brother wanted anything else. The guy took out some small bundle of paper and showed it to Hyuk Ryong-jin. He pointed to it. Seeing this, Hyuk Ryong-jin was stunned. He was shocked. He looked at the object in his brother's hand and was surprised. Taking and opening this piece of paper, the elder brother said that our hero knew that this would happen. What was written there? Our hero laughed and said that one should not be overly prepared. Hyuk Ryong-jin silently looked at his brother. After a short pause, the second young master said that he also had his own conditions. Hyuk Ryong-un was shocked. He did not think about any conditions from his older brother. Hyuk Ryong-jin said that his brother talked about power over the border and asked him to leave it for later. The older brother put his hand on the younger brother's shoulder and said that when he becomes the leader of the cult. The guy continued and added that after he became the leader of the cult, his younger brother would be with him. Our hero was dumbfounded. He did not understand what his older brother was up to. Hyuk Ryong-woon asked Hyuk Ryong-jin what he wanted from him and how he could help him. The older brother said that he would need help, and Hyuk Ryong-un's skills would be useful to him. Hyuk Ryong-jin began to take off his bracelet and said that as a sign of his trust. He handed the bracelet to his brother and told him to accept it as a gift. Hyuk Ryong-un did not understand how this was possible, and his brother simply took and gave him the legendary thing for 2 billion. Laughing it off, our hero said that he could not accept such a gift from his brother. Hyuk Ryong-jin insisted and told his brother to take the bracelet, but he still agreed to accept the gift. The guy handed the bundle of tokens to his brother and said that here they are, and Hyuk Ryong-jin asked if all the tokens were in place. The guy smiled, took something out of his pocket and said that not all the tokens were there. Our hero fired a flare into the sky, and a rocket flew above them. The young man said that their sister also had a bunch of tokens, and he warned her to burn them when given a signal. Surprised, Hyuk Ryong-jin asked what would happen if Hyuk Ryong-wol couldn't burn them. Then our hero said that there were the same number of them, and they would still have to fight. Hyuk Ryong-jin put on a serious face and called his younger brother very smart. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a detachment of some warriors arrived. They all jumped behind the second young master. It was Hyuk Ryong-jin's subordinate along with some fighters from their squad. The second young master looked back and smiled, looking into the eyes of his subordinate, whom he ordered to leave alone. What happened? A powerful and ominous aura began to appear around Hyuk Ryong-jin. Our hero was scared and surprised that it could be an ambush. He did not understand how he could fall for Hyuk Ryong-jin's trick. The guy got scared and said that apparently it was a trap and he would end his life like this. Hyuk Ryong-jin took the bundle of tokens more tightly and began to look at it intently. At that moment, all the tokens on the bundle lit up. Everyone looked at this spectacle. Hyuk Ryong-jin threw the burning tokens to the ground, and our hero did not understand why he did it. Stunned, Hyuk Ryong-un turned to his older brother and asked why he had just burned all the tokens. Hyuk Ryong-jin reached into the inner pocket of his clothes and was about to take something out. The guy smiled and took out a bunch of tokens. Our hero was shocked. An angry Hyuk Ryong-woon asked his brother where he got his sister Hyuk Ryong-wol's dog tags. Hyuk Ryong-jin said that his younger brother had a good plan, but he had enough time to find Hyuk Ryong-wol. The fourth young master was dumbfounded how his brother found their sister in such a short period of time. Hyuk Ryong-jin told his younger brother not to worry about his sister and that she was fine. The second young master added that he just wanted to hear his younger brother's confession. After talking for a whole day, Hyuk Ryong-jin turned away and said that the sun was already setting. Hyuk Ryong-un smiled and said that the ordeal was finally over, and he could breathe out in peace. Through time, House of Hyuk Ryong-un. It's a clear sunny day outside, good atmosphere. Our hero thought that everything was going according to plan before the festival. He remembered everything that happened from the moment he came into this world. He stood and thought that he still somehow felt ill and was not at peace in his soul. He walked somewhere and thought. Our hero thought that if he showed up in the Central Plains like that, then that damn Tae-mu Kwan would have already killed him. Hyuk Ryong-un understood that of course he had an alliance with the second young master, but under no circumstances should he go to the Central Plains. Our hero remembered that in the novel Hyuk Ryong-un was on the side of the second young master, but after receiving the inheritance, he began to avoid the latter. To be more useful, Hyuk Ryong-un offered to lead a detachment into the Central Plains, and soon he met the main character of the novel, Tae-mu Kwan. Not expecting to meet his death there, he was killed by Tae-mu Kwan himself, who had also ridiculed him before. Hyuk Ryong-woon thought that because he changed the course of events at the festival, he does not know how the plot will develop further, and enemies could attack them at any moment. Sang-won-hu entered the room where our hero stood and turned to him, asking why the commander was still here. The guy didn't really understand him. Sangwon-hu recalled that the young man said that today he would attend the general training of the Black Lion Squad. Sangwon-hu also added that if the leader is tired, then you shouldn't overwork yourself. But our hero said that he really should go and look at the results of the training. He looked serious, and knew that the Dark Lion Squad would increase his chances of survival when meeting Tae-mu Kwan. Meanwhile, the screams of warriors and the sounds of training could be heard on the training ground. Sa Bu-seong was training a large Black Lion Squad. It was combat training. Hyuk Ryong-un called out and greeted Sa Bu-seong, who turned his head back and saw his commander along with Sangwon-hu. Sa Bu-seong shouted at the top of his voice to make the entire Black Lion Squad pay attention and greet the squad leader. All the guys on the training ground saluted Hyuk Ryong-won and shouted greetings to him. Our hero praised the fighters and said that they were great, that this was a great job, and also thought that the vice commander did a great job and he was very pleased. Sa Bu-seong shouted for the fighters to continue training, and they obeyed the order. The entire squad trained hard. Dan Pyung was in the forefront, and the guy noticed how he had improved significantly. Looking at all the fighters who had become stronger since joining the squad, he said that it was even better. Our hero drew attention to a small group of warriors in the center of which stood a young man waving a sword. Hyuk Ryong-un wondered what it was and came closer to see what his subjects were doing. The guy waving the sword noticed that the commander of the entire squad was approaching him and began to stop. When Hyuk Ryong-un came as close as possible, the guy stopped and saluted his commander. Hyuk Ryong-un turned to the warrior and asked him to look at the blade of the young man with which he was training. Hyuk Ryong-un took the weapon of his subordinate and was surprised that it was one-in-one modern combat knife. The guy said that it was very similar to a regular blade, but its shape was different. He asked if he said to make a serrator and a hole on the blades. Sangwon-hu thought about it and said that the commander did not say that, and suggested that the weapon was made incorrectly. Our hero asked who made these blades. Sangwon-hu said that he made an order at the forge, which the elder in the hall introduced him to and added that he would clarify. Hyuk Ryong-un said that we need to find the master who made this blade immediately. Surprised, Sangwon-hu said that they would find the blacksmith who forged these blades. Holding in his hands a copy of a modern combat knife from his world, our hero did not understand how this could happen. The guy thought that perhaps someone else from his world got here. Through time, night, the home of the first young master, Hyuk Ryong-geum, is a huge house with red tiles. The guy was sitting inside at a table with some man and drinking some kind of booze. The man turned to the first young master and said that Hyuk Ryong-jin still became the heir by name. This man was Sanvol of the Petition clan. An angry Hyuk Ryong-geum holding a glass hit the table with all his strength. He almost broke the table. Enraged, the drunken first young master shouted that this was some kind of nonsense. Sang-wol objected and shouted that there was no other choice, and they would have to fight the second young master. Pouring another glass of alcohol, Hyuk Ryong-geum said that this was stupidity, because they both knew about the strength of the second young master. The man said that Hyuk Ryong-jin is a loner and no one will harness him. The first young master laughed and asked if the man wanted him to simply send assassins after Hyuk Ryong-jin. The man from the Petition clan laughed and asked if Hyuk Ryong-geum really thought that Hyuk Ryong-jin could be stopped by a simple killer, and then pulled his hand into his inner pocket. Sang-wol took out a bottle with a red cap from his pocket and said that there are more effective methods for such cases. Hyuk Ryong-geum objected and said that his younger brother would never fall for poison. Sang-wol said that he had a hard time getting this baby from the west. The man added that if you believe the people from there, he was taken from very distant lands, further than the western deserts. The first young master said that it was not the strength of the poison, but that Jin would guess. Sang-wol smiled and asked what would happen if the second young master was poisoned by Hyuk Ryong-won, the fourth young master. Hyuk Ryong-geum was surprised. He simultaneously smiled and was dumbfounded by such an idea. He asked if he wanted to set the two brothers against each other. Sanwol of Beritan said that the first young master was beginning to catch on, and if the relationship between the brothers deteriorated, the clans supporting them would be in an awkward position. Putting on a serious face, the first young master said that the man wanted to quietly take control of the divine cult. Holding poison in his hands, Sang-wol from the Beritan clan said that this is exactly the case, and their clans will definitely support Hyuk Ryong-geum. If things go differently, then there will be at least one neutral clan that will help. The man also added that inheritance is recognized not by title, but by the recognition of 6 clans. The first young master laughed and said that this is excellent, and he will leave it as a note. Sang-wol said that he would never leave Hyuk Ryong-geum, and when he becomes the leader of the divine cult, he should not forget who raised him to this position. Rejoicing, Hyuk Ryong-geum smiled, clenched his fist and said that of course he would not forget, and Sang-wol from the Betiatan clan would be adequately rewarded for his help. And then screams were heard from the house, where the first young master asked the servant to bring even more booze and laughed. Meanwhile, at night, a group of unknown people was running along the roof of a house. It was Hyuk-ryong-jin's huge house, and a squad of strangers was running unnoticed on its roof. One of the squad members asked the rest of the guys to stop and said that it was time for them to act. There were 3 people in total. The one who said that they had to go put his hand in his inner pocket and began to rummage around. He took out the same bottle of poison, and after they drilled a small hole in the roof, they began to pour poison into this hole through a bamboo stick. The guy who did all this was wildly worried. His hands were shaking, and beads of sweat were running all over his body. He was holding some kind of rope, which he was pushing into the hole he had made earlier. This was the room where the second young master slept. The guy lowered the rope little by little, and it came closer to Hyuk-ryong-jin's face. The rope was pulled down so far that it almost appeared to be the second young master's lips. Drops of poison dripped from the rope, which they poured from the bottle. Drops fell on the second young master's face. The squad of ninjas who were doing their job said that they had dealt with everything. But the second young master himself did not notice anything. One of the guys said that he didn't expect everything to be so easy. The second said that the others should hurry up, and before the Dark Wing Squad found out, they needed to get rid of the traces of the fourth young master. The guys finished their business, and then jumped from the roof to the ground. They did everything as secretly and silently as possible. Suddenly, out of nowhere, out of the darkness, a hail of arrows rained down on the squad that was carrying out the mission. The arrows wounded 2, and the third stood and did not understand what was happening, where these arrows came from and what happened. One of the guys from the squad reached for his sword and loudly asked who it was and what the hell was going on. A blade was placed in the face of the young man who was reaching for the sword. He was frightened and dumbfounded. Who attacked them? It was a whole squad of black lions. About 5 young men stood in their cloaks and armor, and also looked at their opponents. The frightened guy could not even think that the allies of the fourth young master would attack them, and this urgently needed to be reported to the top. From the darkness, someone began to approach, passing through the entire crowd of warriors. It was a highly respected person. Who was it? It was an angry Hyuk-ryong-wol who was getting closer and closer to one of the ninjas. He was surprised that it was the third young lady. The young man understood that he was already surrounded. He thought that most likely everyone was already aware of the plan they had. There was no time left at all. The guy realized that there was no choice. He began to shout that glory to the Nahu clan, and at that moment he interrupted. From behind, someone hit the young man in the back and he fell, passed out and lying unconscious. It was Hyuk-ryong-jin who did not die. He was alive and whole. He stood near the guy's body and did not say anything. Hyuk-ryong-jin was surprised and said that it looks like Hyuk-ryong-un was not lying about all this. Hyuk-ryong-wol said that if they were late, they would have fallen for the first young master's scheme. Hyuk-ryong-jin said that the girl was right, and it's good that they foresaw this option. However, in his head the guy was thinking about how their younger brother Hyuk-ryong-un came up with all this. Hyuk-ryong-wol turned to one of her subordinates and said that the young man should be taken to the Chanyu clan. Let him know what it was like to be interrogated by their clan. The subordinate bowed and said that he understood everything. Hyuk-ryong-jin asked what about Hyuk-ryong-won, and the girl said that he went to the first young master. The second young master was surprised by this news and asked if his brother really went all alone to Hyuk-ryong-geum. Meanwhile, on the grounds of Hyuk-ryong-geum's house, the guy was walking with Sang-wol and a group of subordinates. He asked if there was any news. The man said that they would soon find out everything. Hyuk-ryong-geum made an angry face and said that the second and fourth young masters humiliated him, and for this they must pay a huge price. San-wol from the Batishan clan laughed and said that there was no need to worry. There would definitely be good news soon. At that moment, while Hyuk-ryong-geum was talking with the man, an arrow was shot out of nowhere and flew towards them. The arrow hit the column, which was just between the head of Hyuk-ryong-geum and the head of Sang-wol. They were scared and dumbfounded by this. Nervous, the first young master began to look around and look for the one who shot the bow. The enraged man screamed at the top of his voice and asked who dared to do this. Some sound was heard on the roof. Throwing away the bow, a man appeared in front of Hyuk-ryong-geum who addressed him as a brother. He looked like Hyuk-ryong-un. After these words, the guy jumped from the roof to the ground and stood in front of the first young master. This was our Hyuk-ryong-un, who was wearing a black cloak and clothes of black lions, and a sword hung on his belt. Hyuk-ryong-geum shouted, asking if the fourth young master had tried to kill him so vilely. The self-confident Hyuk-ryong-un interrupted his brother and corrected him, saying that he was the first to try to do this. The stunned Hyuk-ryong-geum could not understand how our hero could have guessed about his plan, and this cannot happen at all. Our hero smiled and said that some impudent people risked attacking Hyuk-ryong-jin, and his guys by chance were walking there and ran into them. Taking off his outerwear, Hyuk-ryong-geum shouted to his subordinates to make way, and he himself began to walk in the direction of Hyuk-ryong-un. Taking a fighting stance, the first young master said that his brother did not understand who he was dealing with and added that out of good faith, he did not pay attention to his brother's impudent behavior. Our hero shouted for his brother to shut his mouth. He set the brothers against each other, having fun while drinking, and added that the world had had enough of his antics. The older brother was shocked. The angry Hyuk thought that even if he was caught after this, he would still kill his younger brother, and blame all his tricks on him as well. With the help of the Baishan clan, this is possible. The man screamed, and using some powerful sword technique, he swung his sword towards his opponent. Some kind of powerful shockwave flew towards Hyuk. Our hero was stunned by such strength of his brother. When the wave hit the younger brother, there was a strong explosion and all the dust rose into the air. The self-confident Hyuk said that after such a powerful explosion, his brother was definitely dead. Our Hyuk jumped out of the rising cloud of dust, jumping on his older brother. Hyuk, who was serious, flew headlong towards Hyuk. He was angry with his older brother. When our hero was as close as possible to his opponent, he swung at him to hit him with his fist. Hyuk did not understand how our hero could survive, and after that, Hyuk hit his opponent. The guy hit his brother as hard as he could in the stomach. He screamed in pain and was bleeding from his mouth. Hyuk flew away from such a powerful blow from his younger brother. The beaten older brother began to shout and call names to his younger brother, and then swung his sword and ran headlong. Stopping, he took a stance and again struck a crushing blow with swings of his sword in the air. Our hero was surprised and looking at Hyuk. He thought that he had gone crazy and went with his head. With quick jerks, Hyuk dodged every blow from his older brother. Dodging, the guy slowly approached his opponent, that is, Hyuk. The enraged first young master began to yell that his brother was a vegetable and did not know how to fight, because all he did was spin and jump. These words angered our hero. He ran up to him as close as possible and, being from below, said that there was only one vegetable here, and that was Hyuk. The first young master began to swing his sword and shout for his brother to die quickly. Our hero began to use the bracelet that Hyuk gave him, and the bracelet began to transform. The sword turned into a blade, and our hero, filled with rage, began to swing at Hyuk. The elder brother was surprised that the fourth young master had this particular blade. Our hero made a strong, fast, and accurate blow with his blade at his opponent. He made a diagonal cut across Hyuk entire body. He couldn't even scream in pain. He just dropped his sword. The first young master fell to his knees and began to think how a weakling like his younger brother could use a sword technique of such power. Hyuk smiled and said that he had wonderful and worthy mentors who taught him everything. The exhausted man fell to the ground. Hyuk was killed. His younger brother Hyuk stood nearby, and from a small balcony all the guards in Sangwol watched this spectacle. Songwol of the Baishan clan shouted that the fourth young master attacked the first young master and ordered the guards to attack. Both enraged and frightened, Songwol shouted for the guards to kill our hero. Our hero began to take out his blade and say that he had not had time to practice, and therefore would not be able to adequately calculate his strength. Taking a fighting stance, the guy held two blades in his hands. He said that if the guards lay down their weapons, then no one would get hurt. The crowd of guards did not listen to the fourth young master and attacked one in a whole crowd. Our hero was ready to fight, and so he simply stood and looked at his opponents, waiting for him to be overtaken. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Dabo recap with love.